philosopher dies in agony from kidney stones and intestinal blockage. His final hours bring pain so severe that most people would lose their minds. Yet on the last day of his life, he writes to a friend describing the torture in clinical detail, then adds that the pleasure of remembering their conversations outweighs the physical suffering. He dies content, surrounded by students who will celebrate his birthday annually for the next 500 years. The word Epicurean today means someone who enjoys expensive wine and gourmet food. Restaurant critics and luxury lifestyle magazines use it to describe refined taste and sophisticated pleasure. This is backwards. The man whose name became synonymous with fine dining lived on barley bread and water. When a friend sent him cheese, he treated it as a rare luxury to be saved for special occasions. His entire household expenses were minimal. He chose this not from poverty, but from philosophy. Ancient Athens in 307 before the Common Era was the intellectual center of the Mediterranean world. Philosophical schools competed for students like businesses compete for customers. Plato's Academy taught that true reality exists beyond the physical world in eternal forms. Aristotle's Lyceum analyzed everything from politics to biology. The Stoics, newly established, were teaching that the universe runs according to rational necessity. Into this crowded marketplace walked Epicurus with a message so simple it seems stupid. Pleasure is the only good, pain is the only evil, and most of what people chase makes them miserable. The reaction was immediate and hostile. Rival philosophers attacked him. Religious authorities condemned him as atheistic, though he insisted gods existed. Politicians saw him as subversive because he told citizens to avoid public life. When Christianity rose to power centuries later, church fathers declared total war on his philosophy. They burned his books, outlawed his teaching, and spent 1,000 years making sure everyone knew Epicurus was the enemy of all that was holy. They succeeded so completely that of 300 scrolls he wrote, only fragments survive. Then, in 1417, an unemployed papal secretary hunting through German monasteries for old manuscripts found something remarkable. It was a 6,000-line Latin poem by a Roman named Lucretius, written 400 years after Epicurus died. The poem explained Epicurean physics and ethics in vivid detail. Its rediscovery triggered intellectual earthquakes. Within decades, scholars were questioning church authority and investigating natural causes rather than divine ones. Thomas Jefferson owned 5 copies. When asked about his philosophy, he called himself an Epicurean. The American Declaration that all people have the right to pursue happiness carries echoes of a garden in Athens. What did Epicurus actually teach? Not debauchery or selfishness or rejection of morality. He taught that happiness is easy to achieve if you understand what you actually need. That most desires are created by culture rather than nature. That simplicity provides more security than wealth. That friendship matters more than family or romantic love. That death is nothing to fear because you will not be there to experience it. That gods exist but do not care about humans. That the universe operates by natural law without cosmic purpose. These ideas got him called the most dangerous philosopher in history. They remain dangerous now for the same reasons. They undermine every institution that depends on people believing they need what they do not need. Every economy built on endless consumption, every political system built on fear of punishment or hope of reward, every religion that promises salvation through suffering, every status hierarchy that demands competition for position. Epicurus looked at all of this and said, you can just opt out. Live simply, cultivate friendship, meet your basic needs, and be happy. The garden he founded operated for 800 years. 8 centuries of students living together, eating simple food, discussing philosophy, supporting each other. Women studied alongside men, which scandalized conservatives. Former slaves were accepted as equals. The community had no hierarchy beyond the respect given to teachers. Members shared resources and shared their lives. When Epicurus died, he left provisions in his will to continue the daily shared meals and regular discussions. The garden outlasted the Roman Republic, survived the transition to empire, persisted through wars and plagues and social upheaval. Only Christianity's rise finally destroyed it, around the year 400. What follows is a complete account of Epicurean philosophy, as Epicurus actually taught it, stripped of 2,000 years of misrepresentation. The ideas come from the fragments that survived, from the testimonies of followers, from Lucretius's poem, and from archaeological evidence including an entire library of carbonized scrolls found in Herculaneum, buried by the same eruption of Vesuvius that destroyed Pompeii. Modern scholarship has reconstructed what was deliberately obscured. This ancient philosophy speaks directly to modern problems: consumerism, status anxiety, political polarization, fear of death, the search for meaning, the question of how to live well in an indifferent universe. Epicurus addressed all of it 23 centuries ago. The philosophy is simple but not easy. Simple because the principles are clear and few. Not easy because they require acting against cultural pressure at every turn. Live on less. Opt out of competition. Enjoy what is available now. Build your life around friendship and simple daily pleasures. Epicurus was not guessing or speculating. He was reporting observations about human nature and happiness, then drawing logical conclusions from those observations. His method was empirical before empiricism had a name. His ethics were consequentialist before that framework was formalized. His physics anticipated atomic theory by 2,000 years. He was not always right in details, but he was right in orientation. Start with experience, trust observation, test claims against reality, keep what works, and discard what does not. The garden is gone, the scrolls are burned, the teacher is dead 23 centuries. But the ideas survive because they describe something real about human nature and what makes life worth living. Athens in the year 307 before the Common Era was a city that had seen better days. The great age of Pericles was long gone. Alexander's empire had fractured. Philosophical schools competed for students and influence, each claiming to possess the key to the good life. Into this crowded marketplace of ideas walked a man who would buy a garden and change the course of Western thought. Epicurus was born on the island of Samos in 341. His father was a school teacher, barely scraping by. The family had little money and less status. As a young man, Epicurus studied with various teachers, absorbing the atomistic physics of Democritus and the ethical teachings circulating through the Greek world. He was not a natural aristocrat like Plato, who could afford to write dialogues in his spare time. He had to work for everything. By his early 30s, he had developed his own philosophical system. He taught briefly in other cities before arriving in Athens. There he did something unusual. Instead of renting space in the gymnasium or the marketplace where other philosophers held court, he purchased a piece of property outside the city walls. It was just a garden, nothing grand. He set up a simple dwelling and invited his followers to live and study there. This choice revealed everything about his philosophy before he spoke a single word. The garden was private, removed from the noise and competition of civic life. It was modest, requiring little maintenance and less expense. It welcomed everyone regardless of social standing. Women studied there alongside men. Slaves could join as equals. This was radical for Athens, where public life belonged to male citizens and everyone else existed on the margins. The community supported itself through simple work and shared resources. Members ate together, plain food mostly, though occasionally they would splurge on cheese. They spent their days in conversation, walking among the plants, discussing physics and ethics and the nature of happiness. Epicurus wrote constantly, producing more than 300 scrolls over his lifetime, though only fragments survive. What was he like as a person? The hostile accounts, written by rival philosophers and later Christian critics, painted him as a glutton and a libertine, someone who spent his days in sensual excess. These charges stuck for 2,000 years, but the evidence tells a different story. His letters reveal a man who suffered from kidney stones and chronic digestive problems. He lived in considerable physical pain, especially toward the end of his life, yet he maintained his equanimity, continued teaching, continued writing. His final letter, written to a friend on the day of his death, described excruciating pain while simultaneously expressing gratitude for pleasant memories and philosophical conversation. His students loved him. They called him savior, not in a religious sense, but because his teaching had freed them from fear and anxiety. After his death, they celebrated his birthday every year. They preserved his sayings. Some wore rings with his image. This devotion came not from charisma or showmanship, but from the practical impact of his ideas. People felt better after studying with him. Their lives improved in tangible ways. The school in the garden lasted for centuries after his death in 270. Followers spread his teachings throughout the Mediterranean world. By the 1st century before the Common Era, Epicureanism had become one of the major philosophical schools, rivaling Stoicism and Platonism. A Roman poet named Lucretius wrote a 6,000-line poem explaining Epicurean physics and ethics. Roman aristocrats built libraries to house Epicurean texts. The philosophy had staying power because it addressed fundamental human concerns with clarity and practical wisdom. Then it vanished. As Christianity rose to dominance, Epicureanism was actively suppressed. Church fathers condemned it as atheistic and immoral. Epicurean texts were not copied by medieval monks. The school died out. For 1,000 years, Epicurus was known primarily through hostile summaries written by his enemies. His actual words, his careful arguments, his nuanced positions, all of it was lost. Only in the Renaissance did fragments begin to resurface. A manuscript of Lucretius turned up in a German monastery in 1417, reintroducing Epicurean atomism to European thought. Gradually, more pieces emerged from ancient sources. Scholars started to realize that the caricature bore little resemblance to the real philosopher, the man who lived on bread and water, who endured chronic pain without complaint, who valued friendship above all other goods, was not the hedonistic monster of legend. The garden itself is gone now, built over long ago, but the questions Epicurus asked in that modest plot of land remain urgent. What makes life worth living? How should we handle pain and death? What desires should we pursue and which should we ignore? How do we find peace in an uncertain world? He answered these questions without appealing to gods or cosmic purpose or life after death. He worked from what he could observe and what reason could demonstrate. The answers he found were simple enough for anyone to understand and apply. Every philosophical system begins with a question it considers most important. For Plato, it was the nature of reality and how we can know eternal truths. For Aristotle, it was understanding the purpose inherent in all things. For the Stoics, who were Epicurus's contemporaries, it was how to live in harmony with the rational order of the cosmos. Epicurus asked something more direct. What makes life worth living? Not in theory, not in some ideal world, but here and now in the life you are actually living. This question cuts through abstraction. It does not assume that life has inherent meaning waiting to be discovered. It does not start from religious revelation or mathematical proof. It begins with the basic fact that all creatures, humans included, pursue some things and avoid others. We move toward what seems good and away from what seems bad. Even the skeptic who claims nothing matters will eat when hungry and step back from a cliff's edge. Behavior reveals what we actually value, regardless of what we claim to believe. Most people in ancient Athens would have answered the question with conventional pieties. Honor makes life worth living. Glory, virtue, service to the city, devotion to the gods, philosophical wisdom. These were the acceptable answers, the ones that marked you as educated and cultured. Epicurus looked at these answers and found them unsatisfying. Not because they were entirely wrong, but because they were incomplete and often dishonest. Take honor. In practice, the pursuit of honor meant constant competition with your peers, endless anxiety about reputation, vulnerability to the opinions of others. Men killed each other over slights to their honor. Families destroyed themselves pursuing it. Glory was similar. Alexander had conquered the known world and died at 32, possibly poisoned, certainly exhausted. What kind of good is that? The philosophical schools promised wisdom but produced endless arguments and very little practical guidance for daily life. Epicurus proposed a different answer. Life is worth living when it contains more pleasure than pain. This sounds simple to the point of obviousness, but it was revolutionary. He was making pleasure the standard by which everything else should be judged. Not pleasure as an occasional reward for virtue, not pleasure subordinated to higher goods, but pleasure as the good itself. Everything we pursue because we believe it will bring pleasure. Everything we avoid because we believe it will bring pain. This immediately raises objections. What about people who sacrifice pleasure for duty? What about soldiers who die for their country? Parents who suffer for their children? Philosophers who choose truth over comfort? Epicurus had a straightforward response. Look more carefully at what is happening. The soldier believes his sacrifice will bring him honor, which brings pleasure. Or he acts to protect his friends, whose safety brings him pleasure. The parent endures hardship because the child's well-being brings greater pleasure than the pain of the sacrifice. The philosopher pursues truth because it brings the pleasure of understanding and relief from ignorance. Calling someone selfish for pursuing pleasure missed the point entirely. We are built to pursue pleasure. That is not a moral failing, but a fact about human nature, about all animal nature. The question is not whether to pursue pleasure, but which pleasures to pursue and how. Some pleasures come with greater pains attached. Some pains lead to greater pleasures. Some desires can never be satisfied no matter how much we feed them. Others are easily met and bring lasting satisfaction. The radical move was making this the foundation of ethics. Most Greek philosophers believed pleasure was inferior to virtue, reason, or contemplation. Some saw it as actively dangerous, the bestial part of human nature that needed to be controlled. Epicurus inverted this hierarchy. Virtue has value only insofar as it contributes to a pleasant life. Reason is a tool for maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. Contemplation is good when it brings peace of mind, useless when it produces only confusion. This did not mean acting on every impulse. A life spent chasing immediate gratification typically produces more pain than pleasure overall. The drunk feels good while drinking but terrible afterward. The person who eats excessively suffers for their indulgence. Someone who pursues sex indiscriminately creates drama and complication that outweigh the momentary satisfaction. Epicurus was not advocating impulsiveness, he was advocating calculation. What makes life worth living is the right kind of pleasure pursued in the right way. This requires understanding what pleasure actually is, which desires are worth satisfying, and how to structure a life that maximizes contentment while minimizing disturbance. It requires looking honestly at cause and effect. What actually makes you happy? Not what you think should make you happy, not what your culture tells you should make you happy, but what empirically, measurably, improves your experience of being alive. For most people, the answer involves things that cost little and demand less. Friendship, simple food when hungry, water when thirsty, shelter from the elements, freedom from anxiety. These produce reliable pleasure without complicated side effects. The problem is that cities and cultures and human competition push us toward other things. Luxury goods, social status, political power, sexual conquest, accumulation of wealth. These produce unreliable pleasure with guaranteed complications. The question of what makes life worth living becomes practical when framed in terms of pleasure and pain. It shifts philosophy from the lecture hall to the kitchen table. Anyone can evaluate their own life by this standard. Are you experiencing more pleasure than pain? If not, what needs to change? Which desires are you feeding that bring more trouble than satisfaction? Which simple goods are you neglecting? The answers do not require special training or mystical insight. They require honesty and attention. The word pleasure carries baggage. Say that pleasure is the highest good, and people immediately imagine excess and indulgence. This association is so strong that for 2,000 years, critics used it to dismiss Epicurus without reading him. The logic seemed airtight to them. Epicurus spent considerable effort fighting this misunderstanding even during his lifetime. His opponents, particularly the Stoics and later the Christians, found it useful to caricature his position. The contrast was convenient. We advocate virtue and self-control, they said. Epicurus advocates base appetites. We pursue wisdom. He pursues satisfaction of every impulse. The fact that this bore no resemblance to what Epicurus actually taught did not slow the spread of the caricature. Here is what he actually said. Pleasure comes in two forms. There is the pleasure of satisfaction, of fulfilling a desire or need. You are hungry, you eat, you feel pleasure. You are thirsty, you drink, you feel pleasure. This is kinetic pleasure, pleasure in motion, the pleasure of the process itself. Then there is the pleasure of simply existing without pain or disturbance. You are not hungry, you are not thirsty, you are not afraid, you are not anxious. You sit in the garden in the afternoon with nothing bothering you. This is katastematic pleasure, the pleasure of a stable state. Most people focus on the first kind. They chase experiences, sensations, the high of getting what they want. This makes sense on the surface. The pleasure of eating when hungry is real and immediate. The problem is that this kind of pleasure is temporary and requires constant renewal. You eat, you feel satisfied, then hours later you are hungry again. The cycle never ends. Worse, the pursuit of kinetic pleasure often disturbs the more fundamental pleasure of tranquility. Consider a feast. Rich food, exotic dishes, entertainment, wine flowing freely. In the moment, there is pleasure. But the preparation required to arrange such an event creates stress. The expense creates financial pressure. The rich food creates digestive discomfort. The wine creates a hangover. The need to reciprocate creates social obligation. The memory of the feast creates a desire for another one, better and more impressive. What seemed like pure pleasure turns out to carry substantial pain. Now consider a simple meal. Bread, water, perhaps some vegetables. If you are hungry, this produces genuine pleasure. It satisfies the need. It costs almost nothing. It requires minimal preparation. It creates no discomfort afterward. It generates no obligations. Most importantly, once you have eaten, you can return to a state of contentment, asking nothing more from the world until hunger returns. Epicurus was not saying that the simple meal produces more intense pleasure than the feast. In terms of raw sensation, the feast probably wins. He was saying that the simple meal produces a better overall state. It satisfies without disturbing. It brings you to a condition where you need nothing, where you can exist peacefully. That condition is the actual goal. The eating is just a means to reach it. This is why he defined pleasure not as the presence of something positive, but as the absence of pain. When you have no hunger, no thirst, no physical discomfort, no mental disturbance, you have reached the highest pleasure. You cannot improve on this state by adding more. A person who is perfectly content gains nothing from a feast. They are already experiencing the maximum pleasure available to a human being. The feast can only introduce new pains. This redefinition solves a problem that plagued other theories of pleasure. If pleasure is getting what you want, then more is always better. The logic leads to endless accumulation and constant dissatisfaction. There is always something else to want, always another level to reach. But if pleasure is the absence of pain, then it has a natural limit. Once you have removed all pain, you are done. You have achieved the goal. You can rest. The practical implications are significant. It means that happiness is accessible to almost everyone. You do not need wealth to remove hunger. Bread and water will do it. You do not need status to remove the pain of insignificance. You just need to stop caring what strangers think. You do not need luxury to remove physical discomfort. A simple shelter keeps out the rain as well as a palace. The pleasant life is not expensive or difficult to arrange. It just requires understanding what you actually need. It also means that much of what people pursue makes no sense. The businessman working 80 hours a week to afford a bigger house is not increasing his pleasure. He already has shelter. The bigger house adds nothing except new burdens. The politician campaigning for higher office is not increasing his pleasure. He already has security and respect. The higher office adds nothing except new anxieties. They are chasing kinetic pleasure while destroying their tranquility. Epicurus lived this philosophy. His household expenses were reportedly minimal. He ate barley cakes and water most days. When a friend sent him a pot of cheese, he treated it as a special luxury to be savored on important occasions. He owned little. His garden provided vegetables. His needs were met. He spent his time in conversation with friends, walking, thinking, writing. By his own account, he was perfectly happy. This is the pleasure he recommended, not the pleasure of conquest or accumulation or sensation seeking, but the pleasure of having nothing that hurts you and nothing you desperately want, the pleasure of sufficiency, the pleasure of peace. Once you understand that this is what he meant by pleasure, his entire philosophy becomes coherent. He was not advocating indulgence. He was advocating a very specific kind of restraint, one based not on moral duty, but on accurate observation of what actually produces a good life. Pain is a problem for any philosophy. If you claim that life is good, you have to explain why it contains so much suffering. If you claim that the universe is ordered by a benevolent force, you have to explain why that force permits agony. Most philosophical and religious systems handle this by making pain meaningful. It is a test. It is punishment for wrongdoing. It is illusion. It is temporary compared to eternal reward. It builds character. It serves some higher purpose we cannot fully understand. Epicurus rejected all of this. Pain has no meaning. It is not sent by gods to teach you lessons. It is not a stepping stone to virtue. It is not a necessary component of a well-lived life. It is just pain, the body or mind signaling that something is wrong. The appropriate response is not to embrace it or find meaning in it, but to eliminate it when possible and endure it when necessary. This sounds obvious until you consider how radical it was in his context. Greek culture valorized suffering in the service of honor or glory. Athletes endured brutal training. Soldiers were expected to face death without complaint. Philosophers proved their commitment by accepting poverty and hardship. Christianity, which came later, would make suffering central to spiritual development. The righteous suffer. The martyr embraces pain. The ascetic seeks it out. Epicurus stood against this entire tradition. His position was simple. A life contains more pleasure when it contains less pain. Therefore, reducing pain is the primary task. Not secondary to virtue, not subordinate to duty, but primary. If a course of action will produce pain, you need a compelling reason to take it. The burden of proof falls on the pain, not on the avoidance of pain. How do you reduce pain? First, by understanding what causes it. Physical pain comes from injury, illness, hunger, thirst, exposure to harsh conditions. Mental pain comes from fear, anxiety, unfulfilled desire, social conflict, uncertainty about the future. Some of these pains are unavoidable. The human body ages and breaks down. Death comes for everyone, but many pains are self-inflicted or culturally imposed. Take hunger. This is a real pain with a simple solution. You need food. But what kind of food? A person who believes they need expensive delicacies creates a problem where none existed. The hunger is real, but the solution they have chosen is fragile. It depends on having money, on having access to specialty goods, on having someone skilled enough to prepare them. When these conditions are not met, they suffer. A person who will eat bread suffers only when bread is unavailable, which is rare. The second person has created additional pain through their own choices. The same pattern applies to almost every desire. The person who will only sleep on fine linens suffers when traveling. The person who needs constant entertainment suffers in solitude. The person who requires admiration suffers when ignored. They have added conditions to their happiness that did not need to be there. Each condition is a potential source of pain. Mental pain follows similar logic. Much of what people fear will never happen. Much of what they desire cannot be obtained. Much of what they worry about is beyond their control. Each of these mental states produces real suffering despite having no basis in present reality. The person who fears poverty despite having enough money suffers from the fear, not from poverty. The person who desires fame despite living comfortably suffers from the desire, not from obscurity. These are pains they carry with them, unforced. Epicurus argued that philosophy's main job was removing these unnecessary pains, not through willpower or moral discipline, but through clear thinking about cause and effect. If fearing death makes you suffer and death is both inevitable and, while happening to you, imperceptible, then the fear serves no purpose. It is pure pain with no compensating benefit. Understanding this does not require special virtue, it just requires accepting what is actually true. The removal of pain produces a state the Greeks called ataraxia. The word translates roughly as tranquility or imperturbability. It describes a mind that is not disturbed by fear, anxiety, or violent emotion. This is not numbness or indifference. A person in ataraxia still experiences joy, affection, interest in the world. They just do not experience the constant churn of worry and craving that characterizes most mental life. Ataraxia is not a mystical state requiring years of meditation. It is the natural condition of a mind that has removed unnecessary sources of disturbance. If you are not afraid of death, not anxious about the gods, not chasing after wealth or status, not locked in social competition, your mind settles. It becomes quiet. This quietness is not the absence of experience, but the absence of turbulence. For the body, the equivalent state is aponia, the absence of physical pain. This is harder to achieve because bodies are vulnerable. Injury and illness happen regardless of your philosophy. But even here, much pain is avoidable. Overindulgence creates discomfort. Exposure to unnecessary risks creates injury. Poor planning creates hunger and thirst when they could have been prevented. A person who lives simply and carefully will experience less physical pain than a person who does not. When unavoidable pain comes, Epicurus had a strategy for that too. Physical pain, he observed, comes in two types. Acute pain is intense but brief. A broken bone hurts tremendously for a short time, then heals. Chronic pain is milder but persistent. A bad back might ache for years but rarely becomes unbearable. The mind can endure either. During acute pain, you know it will end soon. During chronic pain, you know it is manageable. The truly unbearable combination, intense and endless, does not occur in nature. Bodies that broken simply die. He tested this theory on himself. During his final illness, he was in severe pain from kidney stones and intestinal blockage. Yet his letter written that day expressed contentment. He described the pain frankly, made no pretense of stoic indifference, but noted that the pleasure of recalling philosophical conversations with friends outweighed the physical suffering. The mind's pleasures, he found, could counterbalance the body's pains. This is not the same as finding meaning in suffering. He was not claiming the pain made him better or served a purpose. It was just pain, unfortunate and unwelcome. But the capacity to experience mental pleasure remained intact. By focusing on that, he maintained tranquility despite the body's distress. This was not superhuman endurance, but a practical application of his own principles. The goal of removing pain is not to create a life of constant excitement or intense pleasure. It is to create a life where you are fundamentally okay, where nothing is seriously wrong, where you can exist peacefully. From that foundation, simple pleasures become genuinely enjoyable. A conversation with a friend brings real joy because you are not distracted by anxiety. A meal satisfies because you are not worried about where the next one will come from. A walk in the garden delights because your mind is not churning with fears and desires. This state is available to anyone who understands what causes pain and takes steps to minimize it. You do not need special circumstances or exceptional virtue. You just need clarity about what actually hurts you and what does not. Most of what people think they need, they do not. Most of what they fear will not happen. Most of what disturbs them can be eliminated through better thinking and simpler living. The pleasant life is mostly a matter of subtraction, removing the unnecessary pains that culture and confusion have added to the basic human condition. Human beings need certain things to survive: food, water, shelter from extreme temperatures. These are not cultural constructs or psychological quirks, they are biological requirements. Deprive someone of food long enough and they die. Deprive them of water and they die faster. Expose them to freezing temperatures without protection and they die in hours. The body makes its needs known through pain. Hunger hurts, thirst hurts, freezing hurts. These pains are signals that something necessary is missing. Epicurus called these natural and necessary desires. Natural because they arise from human nature itself, not from social conditioning. Necessary because satisfying them is required for continued existence. Every person who has ever lived has experienced these desires. No amount of philosophical training eliminates them. Even the most disciplined ascetic must eat and drink. The striking thing about these necessary desires is how easy they are to satisfy. Hunger requires food, but not special food. The human digestive system runs on almost anything organic: grain, vegetables, fruit, meat when available. The cheapest foods provide adequate nutrition. Water is even simpler. Any clean water will do. Temperature regulation requires only basic shelter, clothing, or fire. None of this demands wealth or status or exceptional resources. A person living in moderate poverty can satisfy all necessary desires. Barley costs little. Wells and streams provide free water. A simple structure keeps out rain and wind. Scavenged wood makes fire. This is not luxury, but it is sufficiency. The body has what it needs. The pain of hunger, thirst, and exposure does not arise. That absence of pain is, by Epicurean definition, pleasure. Consider how different this is from the messages cities and markets send. You need not just food, but good food. Not just water, but flavored drinks, wines, exotic teas. Not just shelter, but an impressive home in the right neighborhood. Not just clothing, but fashionable clothing that signals status. Each of these messages takes a simple, easily met need and transforms it into something complicated and expensive. The transformation is insidious because it builds on real needs. You do need food. The salesman is not lying when he says you need to eat. He is just lying about what kind of food you need. The core need provides cover for the elaboration. By the time you realize that you are spending enormous resources pursuing something unnecessary, you are already trapped in the pattern. Epicurus wanted people to see through this. Separate the necessary from the unnecessary. When you are hungry, what removes the hunger? Bread does it as effectively as a feast. When you are thirsty, what removes the thirst? Water from a stream does it as effectively as imported wine. When you are cold, what makes you warm? A basic cloak does it as effectively as expensive fabrics. The elaborate versions do not satisfy the need better. They just cost more and create dependency. This is not an argument for poverty. Epicurus was not praising deprivation as virtuous. He was making a practical observation. If your happiness depends on meeting necessary desires, and necessary desires are cheap to meet, then happiness is cheap to achieve. You do not need to compete in the marketplace. You do not need to win the race for wealth and status. You can opt out entirely and still have everything required for a good life. The security this provides is significant. A person whose needs are simple cannot be easily threatened. What can you take from someone who needs only bread and water? What can you offer them as a bribe? What social pressure can you apply to someone who does not care about impressing others? They are financially independent, even on minimal resources. They are psychologically independent of social approval. They are free in a way that the wealthy often are not. Compare two people. The first has expensive tastes. They need fine food, good wine, comfortable surroundings, stylish clothing, entertainment, travel. To afford this, they must maintain a high income. To maintain a high income, they must keep their job or their business. To keep their job or business, they must please bosses or customers. They cannot afford to offend, cannot afford to take breaks, cannot afford to pursue interests that do not pay. Every one of their desires creates a constraint on their freedom. The second person needs only simple food, clean water, basic shelter. They can meet these needs with minimal income. Minimal income can be earned in countless ways, none requiring special skills or groveling to employers. They can stop working for months at a time if they want. They can tell unpleasant people to go away. They can spend their time however they like because almost any level of effort produces enough to cover their needs. They have more freedom despite having less money. This is why Epicurus placed such emphasis on natural and necessary desires. Meeting them is both essential and easy. Once you understand this, you can build your life around it. You arrange things so that these needs are reliably met with minimum effort. Then you spend your time on what actually matters to you. Philosophy, if that is your interest. Friendship, simple pleasures. Whatever you find fulfilling that does not create new necessities. The garden operated on this principle. The community produced enough food to feed everyone. Water came from wells. Shelter was basic but adequate. Everyone's necessary desires were met through modest collective effort. This freed enormous amounts of time and energy for other activities. They were not spending their days chasing money or competing for position. They were thinking, talking, living according to their principles. Modern economies work against this understanding. Advertising exists to convince people that necessary desires require expensive solutions. That hunger requires restaurant meals, not home cooking. That thirst requires branded beverages, not tap water. That shelter requires a mortgage on a large house, not a room in a shared dwelling. That clothing requires fashion, not function. Each message makes happiness more expensive and freedom more distant. People internalize these messages until they cannot distinguish between needs and wants. They genuinely believe they need things that previous generations never heard of. They experience real distress when they cannot afford these things, the same distress they would feel from actual hunger or cold. The unnecessary has become psychologically necessary through repetition and social pressure. Breaking this pattern requires conscious effort. You have to examine each desire and ask whether it is actually necessary. Will you die without it? Will you be in pain without it? Or is it just something you have been taught to want? Most desires fail this test. Most of what people think they need, they do not. The relief of recognizing this can be immediate. Suddenly you need less money. You can work less. You can tell more people no. You can simplify. The test also reveals how much energy goes into pursuing the unnecessary. Time spent earning money for non-essentials. Time spent shopping for things you do not need. Time spent maintaining possessions that serve no real purpose. Time spent worrying about affording a lifestyle built on wants disguised as needs. All of this time could be reclaimed by returning to what is actually necessary. Epicurus promised that this return would not feel like deprivation. Once you stop chasing the necessary becomes genuinely satisfying. Plain food tastes good when you are actually hungry, not just bored. Water is delicious when you are truly thirsty. A simple room feels comfortable when you are not comparing it to mansions. The pleasure is real because the underlying need is real. You are not performing asceticism or proving your virtue. You are just living in accordance with what your body actually requires. Beyond the necessary lies a category of desires that are natural but not required for survival. You will not die from their absence, but pursuing them makes sense given how humans are built. These are desires for variation in food beyond basic nutrition, for sexual pleasure, for comfortable rather than merely adequate shelter, for conversation and social contact beyond what strict necessity demands. Take food again. You need calories and basic nutrients to stay alive. Bread and water provide these, but the human palate distinguishes between bland and flavorful, between monotonous and varied. A person who eats only bread every day will survive, but will experience the meals as tedious. Someone who adds vegetables, fruits, occasionally cheese or fish, will eat with more pleasure despite meeting the same nutritional requirements. Is this additional pleasure worth pursuing? Epicurus said yes, within limits. The desire for varied and pleasant food is natural. It arises from how taste works, from how the body responds to different flavors and textures. Satisfying it adds to life's pleasure without creating problems, provided you do not become dependent on it. The key word is dependent. If you enjoy cheese when you can get it, but remain content with bread when you cannot, the desire is harmless. If you cannot enjoy a meal without cheese, if the absence of cheese makes you suffer, then a natural desire has become a source of pain. You have created a need where none existed before. The pleasure of cheese is no longer worth the pain of missing it. This applies to every natural but unnecessary desire. Sex is natural. The body is built for it. The drive exists independent of culture. But you will not die from celibacy. Some people live happily without sex. Others find it an important pleasure. The question is not whether to pursue it, but whether pursuing it creates more pleasure than pain overall. Casual sex might seem to offer pure pleasure with no downside, but it often generates complications: unwanted pregnancy, disease, emotional attachment that is not reciprocated, jealousy, social drama, reputation damage in some communities. These potential pains must be weighed against the pleasure of the act itself. Sometimes the calculation favors indulgence, often it does not. Epicurus was notably cautious about sex. He did not condemn it, but he did not particularly recommend it either. His reasoning was practical. Sexual desire is powerful and can override clear thinking. People in the grip of sexual passion make poor decisions. They pursue people who are wrong for them. They damage friendships. They create obligations they later regret. The pleasure is brief. The complications can last years. Better, he suggested, to satisfy the desire minimally when it becomes truly pressing, then return attention to more stable pleasures. Do not build your life around sexual conquest. Do not let sexual attraction determine important decisions. Treat it as you would treat an itch. Scratch it if it becomes bothersome, but do not organize your day around scratching. This advice strikes many people as cold. It removes the romance, the passion, the sense that sexual connection is profound or meaningful. That is exactly the point. Epicurus was suspicious of intensity, of peak experiences, of anything that disturbed mental tranquility, even if it felt good in the moment. The person lost in romantic passion is not tranquil. They are agitated, anxious, vulnerable to emotional swings. This state might be exciting, but it is not pleasant in the Epicurean sense. Comfort follows similar logic. You need shelter from the elements. You do not need a luxurious home, but is there value in having a comfortable chair rather than a hard bench, a soft bed rather than a mat on the floor, a warm room rather than a barely adequate one? Yes, if the additional comfort does not create dependency or excessive expense. A comfortable chair costs more than a bench, but not vastly more. If you can afford it without financial strain, it provides daily pleasure for years. This seems worth the cost. A mansion provides no more comfort than a modest house, but costs enormously more. It requires maintenance, creates property tax obligations, signals wealth that attracts envy. The marginal comfort does not justify the additional burden. The pattern is consistent. Natural but unnecessary desires are worth satisfying when doing so is easy and cheap, when the pleasure gained exceeds the effort required, when satisfaction does not create dependency. They are not worth satisfying when they require significant resources, create ongoing obligations, or become needs that disturb you when unmet. This creates a practical decision procedure. Before pursuing any natural but unnecessary pleasure, ask these questions. How much does it cost in money, time, and effort? What complications might it create? Will I suffer if I cannot have it regularly? If the answers are favorable, pursue it. If not, stick with necessary pleasures and save yourself the trouble. Epicurus applied this ruthlessly. He enjoyed cheese when friends sent it. He did not go out of his way to buy it. He appreciated conversation and laughter in the garden. He did not travel to symposia or court invitations from the wealthy. He accepted simple variations in his meals. He did not develop refined tastes that would make plain food unsatisfying. Each choice preserved his independence and tranquility while allowing natural pleasures their place. The result was a life that looked austere from outside but felt abundant from inside. He was not denying himself anything necessary. He was not suffering from deprivation. He was enjoying a variety of simple, natural pleasures without creating dependency on things difficult to obtain. This is a different orientation than either strict asceticism or indulgence. It is selective engagement with pleasure based on clear-eyed assessment of consequences. Modern consumer culture pushes hard against this middle path. Advertising works by taking natural desires and convincing you that only specific, expensive products can satisfy them. You do not just desire varied food. You need gourmet meals. You do not just desire comfort. You need luxury goods. You do not just desire social contact. You need status symbols that impress others. Each of these escalations transforms a manageable natural desire into an expensive dependency. The person who believes they need gourmet food cannot be satisfied with a simple meal, even though the simple meal would have satisfied their hunger perfectly well before their tastes were trained upward. They have been sold a need, and now they suffer when they cannot meet it. Resisting this requires awareness of the mechanism. When you feel desire for something natural but unnecessary, separate the desire itself from the expensive version you are being sold. You desire variety in food. That does not mean you need an expensive restaurant. Cooking different simple meals at home provides variety. You desire comfort. That does not mean you need designer furniture. Functional comfort is available cheaply. You desire pleasant experiences. That does not mean you need expensive entertainment. Conversation with friends costs nothing. The Epicurean approach to these desires is neither puritanical rejection nor enthusiastic indulgence. It is calibrated satisfaction. Take the pleasure where it is easy and cheap. Skip it where it is expensive or complicated. Never allow a natural but unnecessary desire to become something you cannot live without. Keep your happiness independent of things that are hard to get. This produces a stable baseline of contentment that expensive pleasures cannot improve much. A person who enjoys simple comforts and occasional variations is already getting most of the pleasure available from natural but unnecessary desires. Adding more expensive versions provides diminishing returns while creating vulnerability. Better to stay with the simple versions and remain secure. Some desires do not arise from human nature at all. They are created entirely by culture, by social competition, by the examples of others. No infant is born wanting fame. No child naturally desires to be wealthier than their neighbors. These wants are learned, absorbed from the surrounding society, internalized until they feel as urgent as hunger. But they are not natural, and satisfying them is certainly not necessary for a good life. Epicurus identified these as the most dangerous category of desire. Natural and necessary desires are easy to satisfy. Natural but unnecessary desires can be satisfied with modest effort. Unnatural and unnecessary desires cannot be satisfied at all. They have no natural limit, no point at which the person feels they have enough. The pursuit becomes endless, and the disturbance to tranquility is permanent. Consider the desire for wealth. How much money is enough? For meeting natural and necessary desires, very little. For meeting natural but unnecessary desires, still not much. But for the person who wants wealth for its own sake, no amount is enough. The billionaire wants another billion. The millionaire wants to become a billionaire. The comfortable want to become wealthy. At every level, there is someone richer, and the gap creates dissatisfaction. This is because wealth, divorced from its use in meeting actual desires, becomes a form of scorekeeping. You are comparing yourself to others. You are trying to move up in a hierarchy. Since hierarchies have many levels and new people constantly enter at the top, you can never relax. There is always someone above you, always a higher position to reach. The desire feeds on itself, growing stronger with each partial satisfaction. Fame operates the same way. How well known is well known enough? A person known in their neighborhood wants to be known in their city. A person known in their city wants to be known in their country. A person known in their country wants international recognition. A person with international recognition wants to be remembered after death. The scope keeps expanding because fame is relative. It is not measured by internal experience but by comparison with others. Political power follows the same pattern. The person with a little power wants more. The person with more wants total control. Even dictators are not satisfied because they fear rivals and resistance. They must constantly work to maintain their position, always vigilant, always anxious. The possession of power does not bring peace. It brings the opposite. Why do people pursue these things if they bring no satisfaction? Epicurus had an answer. They have been taught that these goods are what make life worth living. Every message from their culture reinforces this. Great men are wealthy, great men are famous, great men hold power. If you achieve these things, you will be great too. You will be happy. You will have made it. The teaching is false. Wealth beyond what meets your desires brings nothing except the burden of managing it. Fame brings loss of privacy and constant demands from strangers. Power brings enemies and anxiety. But the teaching is persistent and supported by vivid examples. The wealthy man appears happy in public. The famous person is surrounded by admirers. The powerful command respect. The surface looks appealing even though the interior is often miserable. People also pursue unnatural desires because they do not know what else to pursue. If you have been taught that happiness comes from external achievement and you are unhappy, the logical conclusion is that you have not achieved enough yet. You need more wealth, more fame, more power. The fact that each acquisition fails to bring lasting satisfaction does not disprove the theory. It just means you need more. The goalpost keeps moving. This creates a trap. The person chasing unnatural desires works constantly, sacrifices present pleasure for future gain, damages their health and relationships, all in pursuit of something that will not satisfy them when they get it. Then they get it and discover the emptiness. But instead of reconsidering the goal, they set a new one. More wealth, greater fame, higher position. The pattern repeats until death. Epicurus proposed a simple test for any desire. Can it be completely satisfied? Hunger can be completely satisfied. You eat until you are no longer hungry, then you stop. Thirst can be completely satisfied. You drink until you are no longer thirsty, then you stop. But can the desire for wealth be completely satisfied? Can you reach a point where you no longer want more money? Most people cannot. This reveals that it is not a natural desire at all. It is something else, something without a natural endpoint. Desires without endpoints cause permanent disturbance. The person pursuing them is never at rest. They cannot reach the tranquil state where nothing is lacking because there is always more to get. Their mental state remains agitated regardless of how much they achieve. This makes happiness impossible by Epicurean standards, which define happiness as the absence of disturbance. The solution is not to satisfy unnatural desires, but to eliminate them. This sounds difficult because these desires can feel very strong once internalized. The person who desperately wants fame feels that need as intensely as physical hunger, but the difference is that unlearning is possible. You cannot unlearn hunger. You can unlearn the belief that fame matters. How? By examining where the desire came from and whether its promise is true. Do wealthy people seem happier than those with enough? Look closely at their lives. Do famous people seem at peace? Pay attention to how they actually live, not how they appear in public. Do powerful people seem content? Notice their paranoia, their isolation, their inability to trust others. The promise of these goods falls apart under observation. Also examine your own experience. Has increasing your wealth made you happier, or has it just made you want more wealth? Has achieving some small fame satisfied you, or has it made you hungry for greater recognition? Has gaining power brought peace, or has it brought new anxieties? Your own life provides evidence about whether these pursuits deliver what they promise. Epicurus bet that honest observation would lead most people to the same conclusion he reached. Unnatural desires are traps. They promise satisfaction but deliver only more wanting. They consume enormous energy and create constant disturbance. They are fundamentally opposed to the pleasant life. The rational response is to starve them, to stop feeding them attention and effort, to let them weaken until they lose their grip. This does not happen overnight. Someone who has spent decades pursuing wealth cannot simply decide to stop caring about money. The neural pathways are established, the habits are deep, but the process can begin. Each time the desire arises, you can notice it, recognize it as unnatural. Remember that satisfying it will not help. Over time, the desire weakens. It becomes background noise rather than a driving force. What replaces it? Ideally, attention to natural desires and to the stable pleasures they provide. Friendship, conversation, simple food when hungry, rest when tired, the garden in the afternoon. These things actually satisfy. They have natural endpoints. You can have enough of them and feel complete. Building a life around them produces a fundamentally different experience than building a life around wealth, fame, or power. The person who has eliminated unnatural desires appears strange to others. They are not competitive. They are not ambitious. They do not care about climbing social hierarchies. They seem to lack drive. But from the inside, they have what the ambitious person is chasing and never finding. They have contentment. They have tranquility. They have a life that feels good to live rather than a life spent working towards some future state that never arrives. Epicurus needed to explain how the world works. Not out of pure curiosity, though he was certainly curious, but because people's beliefs about the world determine their fears. If you believe the world is controlled by gods who punish wrongdoing, you will fear divine retribution. If you believe in an afterlife where souls are judged, you will fear death. If you believe events happen according to some cosmic plan, you will feel helpless and anxious. These fears disturb tranquility. Therefore, physics matters for ethics. His explanation was remarkably simple for something attempting to account for all of reality. Everything that exists is made of atoms moving through void. That is it. Two fundamental entities, atoms and void. Atoms are tiny, indivisible particles, too small to see. Void is empty space, the absence of anything. All the complexity of the visible world, from rocks to humans to stars, is just atoms in different arrangements. This was not original to Epicurus. A philosopher named Democritus had proposed atomic theory more than a century earlier, but Democritus had not developed the ethical implications. Epicurus took the physics and built an entire system of living around it. If atomism is true, certain conclusions follow about gods, death, and human nature. These conclusions remove the major sources of fear that disturb human life. Atoms have a few basic properties. They are solid and cannot be destroyed or created. They have shape and size, though the variations are enormous. Some are smooth, some rough, some hooked, some spherical. When atoms collide, they can link together if their shapes allow it. This linking creates compound objects, everything from stones to living creatures. When the linkage breaks apart, the object dissolves, but the atoms continue existing. They just recombine into something else. Atoms are always moving. They fall through the void under their own weight. In the beginning, if there was a beginning, all atoms were falling parallel to each other, like rain. But at some point, some atoms swerved slightly from their straight paths. This tiny deviation caused collisions. Collisions caused more deviations and more collisions. Eventually, atoms were moving in all directions, colliding constantly, forming temporary structures that held together for a while before dissolving. Our world is one such structure. Atoms collided and stuck together in ways that created earth, water, air, fire. Further collisions created plants and animals. The human body is an atomic structure, more complex than a rock but not different in kind. When you eat, you incorporate atoms from food into your structure. When you excrete, you release atoms. When you die, the entire structure comes apart. The atoms that made you scatter and recombine into other things. Nothing is lost, nothing was created. The atoms were always here and always will be. This immediately addresses the fear of death. If you are a temporary configuration of atoms, death is just the dissolution of that configuration. The atoms continue. There is no you to experience anything after death because the particular arrangement that constituted you no longer exists. You cannot suffer when dead for the same reason a disassembled watch cannot tell time. The mechanism is gone. It also addresses the question of gods. In an atomic universe, there is no room for divine intervention. Events happen because atoms collide in certain ways. The patterns are natural, not controlled. Thunder is not Zeus's anger. It is air molecules moving in particular patterns. Disease is not divine punishment. It is atomic processes in the body going wrong. Natural disasters are not messages from heaven, they are large-scale atomic rearrangements. This does not mean gods do not exist. Epicurus believed they did, but they exist as atomic structures like everything else, living in the spaces between worlds, undisturbed by what happens in our world. They are too perfect and tranquil to care about human affairs. Praying to them is pointless. They are not listening. They have achieved perfect ataraxia and have no interest in disturbing it by getting involved in the messy atomic rearrangements that constitute human life. This removal of divine providence was perhaps Epicurus's most radical move. It left humans in a universe that did not care about them. No cosmic plan, no higher purpose, no guaranteed justice. Just atoms colliding according to their nature. For many people, this was terrifying. Without gods watching, what prevents chaos? Without divine punishment, what stops wrongdoing? Without purpose, why do anything at all? Epicurus's answer was that these were the wrong questions. The absence of divine control is liberating, not terrifying. You do not need to worry about pleasing the gods because they are not paying attention. You do not need to fear divine punishment because it is not coming. You do not need to find cosmic purpose because your purpose is whatever you decide it is. You are free to pursue a pleasant life without worrying about whether it aligns with some divine plan. The physics also addressed free will. If everything is atoms following natural laws, how can humans make choices? Are we not just complicated machines? Are actions determined by prior atomic configurations? This worried Epicurus because determinism seemed to make ethics meaningless. How can you praise or blame people for actions they had no choice but to perform? His solution was the swerve. Atoms do not always follow strictly predictable paths. At random moments, they deviate slightly. These deviations are not caused by anything, they just happen. This introduces an element of genuine randomness into the universe. Not everything is determined by prior states. Some events occur spontaneously, without cause. This randomness, Epicurus argued, creates space for free will. Human choice involves atomic processes in the mind, and if atoms can swerve unpredictably, then mental events are not entirely determined. You could have chosen otherwise because the atomic configurations in your brain could have gone differently. The swerve is tiny, but it breaks the chain of determinism. That is enough to preserve meaningful choice. Critics attacked this argument immediately and have continued attacking it for 2,000 years. The swerve seems arbitrary. Why do atoms swerve? No reason is given. The timing appears random. This looks like cheating, inserting an unexplained exception to save the theory. And even if atoms swerve, it is not clear how that creates free will, rather than just replacing determinism with randomness. A choice determined by a random atomic swerve is not really a choice. Epicurus was not particularly bothered by these objections. He was not trying to give a complete scientific account of atomic behavior. He was trying to preserve human freedom against deterministic physics. The swerve did that job. It showed that strict determinism was not required by atomism. Whether the mechanism was fully explained was secondary to the ethical conclusion. Humans have meaningful choices, therefore ethics matters. Therefore his philosophy of pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain makes sense. The atomic theory served Epicurus's ethical project throughout. It explained why death is not to be feared. It explained why gods need not be feared. It explained how humans can make real choices. It provided a picture of the universe that removed supernatural terror while preserving human agency. This was physics in service of tranquility, not physics as an end in itself. Modern physics has moved far beyond Epicurean atomism. We know that atoms are divisible into protons, neutrons, and electrons. We know those are made of quarks and leptons. We know matter and energy are interchangeable. We know quantum mechanics governs the very small and relativity governs the very large. Epicurus's specific claims about atomic shapes and movements are simply wrong, but his basic insight holds. The universe operates according to natural principles, not divine whim. Events have physical causes. There is no cosmic judge watching and intervening. This means the fears he addressed, fear of divine punishment and fear of meaningful death, remain unfounded. The physics has changed. The ethical conclusion remains valid. We still live in a universe that does not care about us, and that is still liberating rather than terrifying if you accept it honestly. The swerve was Epicurus's most controversial idea, attacked by opponents and sometimes an embarrassment to supporters. On its face, it seems absurd. Atoms sometimes deviate from their paths for no reason. This appears to violate basic principles of causation. Events should have causes. Random swerves in particles look like giving up on explanation rather than providing one. Yet Epicurus insisted on the swerve, and understanding why reveals something important about his entire project. He was not primarily interested in physics, he was interested in ethics, and ethics requires that human beings have meaningful agency. If every event is fully determined by prior events, stretching back to the beginning of time, then your choices are illusions. You think you are deciding what to do, but actually atomic configurations in your brain are unfolding according to fixed laws. You could not have done otherwise. This is incompatible with any ethical system. If you could not have done otherwise, it makes no sense to praise you for good actions or blame you for bad ones. It makes no sense to feel regret or pride. It makes no sense to deliberate about what to do since the deliberation itself is determined. Most importantly for Epicurus, it makes no sense to pursue pleasure and avoid pain as if these were real choices. The entire philosophical project collapses if determinism is true. The Stoics accepted determinism. They believed the universe unfolds according to rational necessity. Everything that happens must happen. Human reason, properly developed, aligns itself with this cosmic reason and accepts fate. The wise person wants what happens to happen because they understand it could not be otherwise. This produces a different kind of tranquility, based on acceptance rather than choice. Epicurus rejected this path. He wanted humans to have genuine options, to be genuinely capable of shaping their lives. The pleasant life required choosing simple pleasures over complicated ones, necessary desires over unnecessary ones, tranquility over disturbance. These choices had to be real. Otherwise, his entire philosophy became a description of how some people, through lucky atomic configurations, end up living pleasantly while others do not. That was not useful. So he needed to break determinism. The swerve did that. If atoms sometimes deviate unpredictably, then the future is not entirely fixed by the past. New possibilities open up that would not have existed in a purely deterministic system. This tiny bit of fundamental randomness propagates upward through levels of organization until it reaches human minds, where it creates the possibility of free choice. The mechanism is not clear. How does atomic randomness translate into meaningful human agency? Epicurus did not explain this in detail, and probably could not have given the limits of ancient science. But he did not need a detailed mechanism. He needed to show that determinism was not the only option, that a physical universe could include genuine openness to multiple possible futures. The swerve demonstrated that. Think of it this way. Determinism says that given the complete state of the universe at one moment, only one possible future exists. Everything that follows is fixed. The swerve says that given the complete state of the universe at one moment, multiple possible futures exist because atoms might swerve or might not. Which future actually occurs is not determined by the present state. This introduces real contingency into the universe. Human minds, being made of atoms, participate in this contingency. When you deliberate about what to do, the outcome is not fixed in advance. Different atomic configurations in your brain could produce different decisions. You have genuine alternatives. Whichever one you choose, you could have chosen differently. This is enough to make ethics meaningful and to make the Epicurean project of choosing a pleasant life make sense. Critics complain that this just replaced determinism with randomness, which is no better. If your decisions come down to random atomic swerves, you are not really choosing. The swerve is choosing for you. You have no more control than you would in a deterministic system. The appearance of freedom is still illusion. Epicurus would likely respond that this misunderstands how the swerve operates. It is not that every decision reduces to a coin flip at the atomic level. Rather, the swerve introduces enough indeterminacy that strict determinism fails. Within that space of indeterminacy, higher-level processes like reasoning, deliberation, and character can influence outcomes. The randomness breaks the deterministic chain without making everything purely random. Modern discussions of free will face similar issues. Quantum mechanics introduces genuine randomness at the smallest scales, similar to Epicurus's swerve. But physicists and philosophers still argue about whether this quantum randomness creates space for free will or just replaces determinism with dice rolls. The debate Epicurus started continues with more sophisticated vocabulary but similar structure. What matters for understanding Epicurus is not whether his solution works in technical detail, but what it reveals about his priorities. He was willing to insert what looked like an arbitrary exception into his physics to preserve human freedom. This shows that freedom mattered more to him than theoretical elegance. He was not trying to build the most parsimonious physical theory. He was trying to build a theory that supported human flourishing. The swerve also reveals something about uncertainty. Epicurus was comfortable with a universe that contained irreducible randomness. Not everything needs an explanation. Not every event needs a cause. Sometimes things just happen. This tolerance for fundamental contingency sets him apart from many ancient and modern thinkers who demand complete causal accounts of everything. That tolerance connects to his ethics. A person who accepts that some things happen for no particular reason is less likely to search for hidden meanings or divine plans. They can accept that bad things sometimes occur without being punishment or lesson or part of some larger story. This makes it easier to focus on what you can control and let go of what you cannot. If atoms swerve randomly, why expect the universe to care about your plans? The swerve appears in Epicurean physics not because it is well evidenced or theoretically necessary, but because it does essential philosophical work. It preserves meaningful human agency in a material universe. It breaks determinism without requiring gods or souls or anything non-physical. It allows for a naturalistic worldview that still leaves room for ethics, choice, and the pursuit of a good life. That is its purpose, and by that standard, it succeeds. Whether atoms actually swerve is a question for physics. Whether humans have free will is a question that may never be fully resolved. But Epicurus established that these questions matter for how we live. If we are determined machines, one approach to life makes sense. If we have genuine choices, another approach makes sense. His philosophy assumes the second, and the swerve guarantees that assumption is at least coherent within his physical framework. Humans fear death. This fear shapes enormous parts of life. It drives religious belief, military aggression, medical spending, legacy building, and the treatment of elderly people. Cultures develop elaborate stories about what happens after death, almost always featuring some form of continued existence. Heaven, hell, reincarnation, ancestral realms, countless variations on the theme that death is not really the end. Epicurus believed all of this was based on confusion, and that clearing up the confusion would remove the fear. His argument was simple. Death is the end of experience. When you are dead, you do not experience anything. You do not experience darkness or silence or void. You do not experience the passage of time. You are not there to experience. Therefore, death itself cannot be bad for you because there is no you to whom it could be bad. The confusion arises from imagining death from the wrong perspective. People imagine being dead as if it were a state they could experience and evaluate. But being dead is not a state you experience. It is the absence of all states, all experiences, all you. You cannot be somewhere experiencing nothing. You cannot be observing your own non-existence. These are contradictory notions. Death is not something that happens to you. It is the point at which you stop happening. Consider the time before you were born. For billions of years, the universe existed without you. Did that bother you? Do you regret missing the construction of the pyramids, the fall of Troy, the ice ages? Presumably not, because you were not there to miss anything. Death will be exactly like that. The universe will continue without you, and you will not be there to mind. Same condition, just following life instead of preceding it. This symmetry helps show why fearing death makes no sense. If you do not fear the infinite past that occurred before your birth, you have no logical reason to fear the infinite future that will occur after your death. Both are times when you do not exist. If one is acceptable, the other should be too. People object that they did not lose anything by not existing before birth, but they lose everything by ceasing to exist at death. Before birth, there was no them to lose anything. After death, there will be no them to have lost anything. The loss only appears real from the perspective of the living person contemplating death, not from any actual perspective the dead person has. Another objection is that death deprives you of future goods. If you die young, you miss out on years of experiences you could have had. This makes death bad not as an experienced state, but as a deprivation of potential. Epicurus would respond that deprivation only matters to someone who exists to be deprived. Once you are dead, there is no you to miss those experiences. You can only regret this deprivation while alive, which means you are not actually fearing death but fearing the dying, the approach to death while still alive. This distinction matters. The process of dying might be unpleasant. Illness, pain, fear, sadness at leaving loved ones, these are real and occur while you still exist. Fearing these makes sense. You will experience them and they might be bad experiences. But that is fearing pain and loss, not fearing death itself. Death itself, the state of being dead, will not hurt because you will not be there to hurt. Epicurus encouraged people to separate these. If you fear dying painfully, that is reasonable, and you can take steps to reduce that risk. If you fear being dead, that is confused, and you should recognize the confusion and let it go. The fear of death as such, as opposed to the fear of dying badly, rests on imagining that death is something you will experience. It is not. Letters from Epicurus show him applying this to his own mortality. When his final illness came, he was in great pain. He described the pain factually in letters to friends. He made arrangements for the school to continue after his death. He expressed satisfaction with the life he had lived. But he did not express fear of death itself. The pain bothered him because he was still alive to feel it. Death, coming soon, did not bother him because when it came, he would not be there to feel anything. This raises the question of why bother living if death is neutral? If being dead is no worse than not having been born yet, and if you were fine before birth, why not be fine with dying soon? Why value life at all? The answer is that life contains pleasures. While alive, you can experience friendship, conversation, food when hungry, relief from pain, the satisfaction of understanding. These are goods. They make life worth living. Death removes access to them, but death itself is not bad. It is just the absence of the good. Think of it this way. Ice cream is good when you are eating it. When you finish the ice cream, you no longer experience that good. The absence of ice cream is not bad in itself. It is just neutral, the default state. While you have access to ice cream, you might as well enjoy it. When you no longer have access, you are not suffering from the absence. You are just back to neutral. Life is the ice cream. Death is having finished it. This means that fearing death is actually counterproductive. The time you spend fearing death is time you are not enjoying life. You are introducing pain into life, the pain of fear, because of something that will not itself be painful. You are making your life worse for no benefit. Better to accept that death will come, it will not be an experience, and therefore it is nothing to worry about. Spend the time you would have spent fearing death actually living. Religions and philosophies that promised survival after death were, in Epicurus' view, making things worse rather than better. They kept people focused on death by insisting it was the most important event in existence, the gateway to eternal reward or punishment. This made death terrifying rather than neutral. It encouraged people to sacrifice present well-being for hypothetical future states. It created priesthoods and rituals and endless anxiety about meeting divine standards. Epicurus wanted to cut through all of that. Death is natural. It happens to every living thing. It is not a punishment or a transition or a test. It is just the end of a particular atomic configuration. Your atoms will continue in other forms. You will not, because you are the configuration, not the atoms. This is not bad. It is just how material reality works. Some people find this view bleak. They want to matter in some cosmic sense, to have their existence recorded somewhere permanent, to continue in some form. Epicurus would say that this want is itself a source of pain. It is an unnatural and unnecessary desire. You are here now, that is enough. You do not need to be here forever. You do not need to be remembered forever. You just need to live well while you are living. The Epicurean attitude toward death produces specific recommendations for how to live. Do not postpone pleasure waiting for some future time. The future might not come. Do not sacrifice your well-being for glory or legacy. You will not be around to enjoy that glory. Do not spend years accumulating wealth to leave to heirs. You will be dead, and your heirs' wealth will not matter to you. Live now. Enjoy what can be enjoyed now. Build friendships now. The only time you have is the present. This is not hedonistic recklessness. Epicurus was not saying to ignore consequences or live purely in the moment. Planning for the future makes sense because you will probably have a future, and you will be happier if you have prepared for it. But do not live entirely for the future at the expense of the present. Balance is needed. Provide for tomorrow, but do not forget to live today. The removal of death fear was, for Epicurus, one of the main achievements of philosophy. People who genuinely accepted that death was nothing to fear experienced immediate relief. An enormous source of background anxiety disappeared. They could focus on living without the constant shadow of mortality darkening everything. This was practical philosophy, philosophy that changed daily experience, not just theoretical understanding. Epicurus believed in gods. This surprises people who know him as the philosopher who removed divine influence from the world. But he was not an atheist in the modern sense. He thought gods existed. He thought they were real beings, not human inventions or personified natural forces. He just thought they had nothing to do with us. The gods, according to Epicurus, are made of atoms like everything else, but their atomic structure is far more refined than human bodies. They exist in the spaces between worlds, in regions of the cosmos where matter is thin and conditions are stable. They have perfect bodies that do not decay or feel pain. They have perfect minds that experience constant tranquility. They are essentially the ideal that Epicurus recommended for humans, achieved completely and permanently. How do we know gods exist if they never interact with our world? Epicurus argued that all humans have a natural concept of gods. Every culture worships divine beings. This universal belief suggests something real underlies it. Additionally, people sometimes have visions or dreams of gods. These visions, Epicurus thought, were caused by thin films of atoms emanating from the gods and occasionally reaching human minds. The gods are not deliberately sending these images. The films just naturally flow from their bodies and sometimes travel far enough to reach us. But the gods do not care about humanity. They do not watch our actions. They do not answer prayers. They do not send rewards or punishments. They do not interfere in natural processes. They exist in perfect happiness, completely self-sufficient, utterly unconcerned with what happens in our world. To care about us would disturb their tranquility, and they have achieved a state beyond all disturbance. This position allowed Epicurus to acknowledge popular religion while stripping it of any practical significance. Yes, gods exist. No, they do not matter for how you should live. You can participate in traditional worship if you want, as Epicurus himself did. The rituals can be pleasant community experiences, but do not expect anything from them. The gods are not listening. They are not going to help you or hurt you based on your piety. This was radical and dangerous. Greek and Roman religion was not primarily about personal belief. It was about performing the correct rituals to maintain good relations with the gods. Failing to do so could bring divine anger on yourself and your community. Plague, drought, military defeat, all of these could result from impiety. Epicurus was saying this entire framework was wrong. The gods were not sending plague or drought. Natural atomic processes were. Critics accused Epicurus of atheism despite his protestations otherwise. If the gods do nothing, what is the difference between believing in them and not believing in them? The practical difference is nil. A person following Epicurean philosophy lives exactly as an atheist would, without prayer, without sacrifice for divine favor, without fear of divine punishment. Calling this theism seemed like word games. But Epicurus had reasons for retaining gods. First, it avoided direct confrontation with popular religion in a way that might have made his philosophy illegal or gotten him executed. Socrates had been killed for impiety. Epicurus was careful to say nothing that could be clearly labeled atheism, even while removing any reason to fear or worship the gods. Second, the gods served as models. They demonstrated that perfect tranquility was possible. They showed what a life without pain or disturbance looked like. Humans could not achieve this completely because our atomic structure is too coarse. We have bodies that age and sicken. We have needs that create vulnerability. But we can approximate the divine condition by minimizing pain and eliminating fear. The gods proved it was a coherent ideal. Third, contemplating the gods could itself be pleasant. Imagining perfect beings living in perfect happiness, completely free from all the troubles that afflict humans, was a kind of mental rest. It gave the mind something beautiful to consider. This was not prayer or worship in the traditional sense. It was more like aesthetic appreciation. The gods were there, supremely happy, and thinking about that was calming. The Epicurean gods were also useful for explaining certain phenomena. How do we have the concept of God if gods are not real? Because the concept comes from actual encounters with emanations from real gods. Why do people across all cultures worship? Because all humans receive these emanations and form similar concepts. The gods served explanatory purposes without requiring divine intervention in the world. Removing divine intervention had enormous implications. It meant that natural disasters were not punishments. They were just atomic events. Illness was not sent by angry gods. It was biological malfunction. Misfortune was not testing your faith. It was chance. This stripped the universe of moral meaning. Things happened for physical reasons, not because you deserved them or because they were teaching you something. For many people, this was deeply unsettling. The idea that the universe has moral structure, that good is rewarded and evil punished, that suffering has meaning, is psychologically comforting even when it creates fear of divine anger. Without it, life can seem arbitrary and purposeless. Epicurus accepted this and said that accepting it was necessary for peace of mind. Why is it necessary? Because believing the gods control events makes you vulnerable to fear. If they control events, you must please them. But what pleases them? Different religious traditions give different answers. You can never be certain you are doing it right. This creates anxiety. You are always wondering if you have performed the rituals correctly, if you have offended some deity inadvertently, if disaster will strike because of your impiety. Even worse, believing in divine control makes you blame yourself for misfortune. If gods punish wrongdoing and you are suffering, you must have done something wrong. This adds guilt and shame to whatever pain you are already experiencing. You are sick, and on top of the sickness, you wonder what sin brought this on you. This doubles the suffering unnecessarily. Epicurus wanted to remove this. Bad things happen because of atomic processes, not because you angered the gods. You can be a perfectly good person and still get sick, lose property, experience tragedy. This is not fair, but it is not unfair either. It is just natural. Atoms collide and sometimes the results are bad for you. Nobody is punishing you. Nobody is teaching you a lesson. It is just physics. This allows a kind of equanimity in the face of misfortune. When bad things happen, you do not need to search for what you did wrong. You do not need to perform rituals to appease divine anger. You just deal with the practical situation. You are sick, so you rest and seek treatment. You lost property, so you adjust your life to what remains. You experience tragedy, so you grieve and continue. No metaphysical drama required. It also removes the need to thank gods for good fortune. If something good happens, it is not because you pleased the gods. It is just because atomic configurations worked in your favor this time. This might seem to diminish gratitude, but Epicurus would say it clarifies it. Be grateful to the people who helped you. Be grateful for the circumstances that worked out well. Do not waste time thanking beings who did not notice you exist. The political implications of this view were significant. States used religion to control populations. Obey the laws or the gods will punish you. Support the government that performs the proper rituals. Die for your city because the gods favor it. Epicurus undercut all of this. If the gods do not care, then religious arguments for political obedience are empty. You should obey laws only if they actually benefit you, not because divine mandate requires it. This made Epicureanism suspicious to authorities. A population that did not fear divine punishment was harder to control. People who rejected religious justifications for political power were potentially seditious. The retreat to the garden, the refusal to participate in public life, looked like withdrawal of consent from the entire social order. In a sense, it was. The gods of Epicurus remain in their distant perfection, utterly indifferent to humanity. They are real but irrelevant, beautiful but useless. They do not love us, hate us, help us, harm us, or even notice us. This is not the God of philosophers who creates and sustains the universe. It is not the God of religious experience who speaks to believers. It is something closer to a beautiful mathematical theorem, real and perfect and completely unconcerned with human life. For Epicurus, this was exactly the kind of God worth believing in because it did not create any obligation or fear. Of all the things Epicurus valued, he placed friendship highest. Not wealth, not knowledge, not even pleasure in the abstract, but friendship specifically. He wrote that friendship dances through the world, calling everyone to wake up and recognize its importance. He said that the wise person would even be willing to die for a friend. This is remarkable in a philosophy usually characterized as focused on personal pleasure and withdrawn from social engagement. Why did friendship matter so much? The answer ties to Epicurus's entire system. A pleasant life requires freedom from anxiety. Anxiety comes largely from insecurity. Will you have food tomorrow? Will you be safe from harm? Will you have help if you become ill or injured? These uncertainties create constant background worry. Friendship solves these problems. A person with true friends has material security. If you fall on hard times, friends will help. If you become ill, friends will care for you. If you face threats, friends will protect you. This creates a safety net that no amount of personal wealth can match. Wealth can be stolen or lost. Friends, if chosen well, remain reliable. The security friendship provides allows you to stop worrying about worst-case scenarios. You know you will not be abandoned in times of need. Friends also provide mental security. Humans are social creatures. Extended isolation creates psychological distress. Having people to talk with, to share experiences with, to receive affection from, meets a deep need. This is a natural and necessary desire in Epicurus's taxonomy. You can satisfy it through friendship without the complications that come with other social connections. Compare friendship with family. Family relationships come with obligations, expectations, and often conflict. Parents demand respect. Children require care. Siblings compete for resources and attention. You do not choose your family, and you cannot easily escape them. Family can be a source of support, but it can also be a source of tremendous stress. Compare friendship with romantic relationships. Romantic love is intense, which means it is disturbing to tranquility. The early stages involve obsession and anxiety. Will they return your affection? Are you good enough? The established stages involve jealousy, possessiveness, and fear of loss. Sexual relationships create additional complications. Pregnancy, disease, social judgment, all of these can result from sexual involvement. The pleasure is real, but the disruption is significant. Friendship avoids most of these problems. You choose your friends. You can end friendships that become toxic. Friends do not typically demand exclusivity or create jealousy. Friendship can be deep without being destabilizing. It provides companionship without requiring the intensity that makes romantic relationships so turbulent. For these reasons, Epicurus saw friendship as the optimal social bond. What makes a true friend in the Epicurean sense? Not utility, though useful friends are valuable. Not mere pleasure in someone's company, though that is part of it. A true friend is someone who shares your values, who wants you to flourish, whose presence makes your life better in stable ways. The test is whether you would want this person in your life even if they could do nothing useful for you. If the answer is yes, it is friendship. If the answer is no, it is something else. Epicurus practiced what he taught. The school in the garden was fundamentally a community of friends. Members shared resources, ate together, spent their days in conversation. When Epicurus died, he left instructions for care of the remaining students and provisions for continuing the shared meals and discussions. He was creating institutional structures to support friendship beyond his own lifetime. The garden welcomed everyone, which was unusual for Greek philosophical schools. Women studied there, which scandalized conservatives. One prominent member was a former sex worker named Leontion. Slaves were accepted as equals. Social hierarchy was deliberately flattened. What mattered was not status or wealth or gender, but commitment to the philosophy and capacity for friendship. This created suspicion. What were they doing in that garden with men and women mixing freely? Surely something scandalous. Opponents spread rumors of orgies and debauchery, but the evidence suggests the reality was mundane. They were eating simple meals, walking, talking about philosophy, and supporting each other in living according to Epicurean principles. The shocking thing was not sexual excess, but genuine equality and mutual care across social boundaries. Why did they need to live together? Could they not just be friends while living separately? They could, and some Epicureans did. But the communal arrangement had advantages. It made the simple life easier to sustain. Shared housing and meals are cheaper than separate ones. It provided constant reinforcement of philosophical principles. When you are surrounded by people living a certain way, you are more likely to maintain that way yourself. And it created the kind of deep daily friendship that requires proximity. Think of it as a chosen family, constructed around shared values rather than blood relation. The members genuinely cared for each other. They celebrated together, they mourned together, they supported each other through illness and hardship. This was not abstract philosophical fellowship, but concrete daily mutual aid. The friendship was real and practical, not just theoretical. Modern readers sometimes struggle with Epicurus's emphasis on friendship, because modern life makes the kind of friendship he described difficult to achieve. People move for jobs. They live far from those they are close to. They maintain friendships primarily through occasional communication rather than daily shared life. The idea of creating a community like the garden seems impractical or cultish, but the core insight remains valid. Strong friendships provide security, both material and psychological. That security reduces anxiety. Reduced anxiety enables tranquility. Tranquility is the goal. Therefore, cultivating friendship is one of the most important things you can do for your own well-being. This is not selfishly using people. It is recognizing that humans need each other, and that formalizing mutual support through friendship benefits everyone involved. Some critics accuse Epicurus of reducing friendship to utility. You value friends because they make you feel secure. This seems to make friendship instrumental, a means to the end of personal pleasure. But Epicurus would reject this characterization. He distinguished between the origin of friendship and its mature form. Friendship might begin because of utility or pleasure, but genuine friendship grows beyond that. You come to value the friend for themselves, not just for what they provide. You would help them even at cost to yourself, as he explicitly acknowledged. This is compatible with his ethics because the flourishing of friends contributes to your own pleasure. Seeing friends do well makes you happy. Helping friends feels good. The boundaries between self-interest and altruism blur in genuine friendship. What is good for them becomes good for you, not instrumentally but directly. Their happiness is part of your happiness. This is not a paradox or a departure from egoism. It is how human psychology actually works in close relationships. The practical advice is clear. Invest time in building real friendships. Not networking contacts, not social media connections, but people you actually care about and who care about you. Prioritize time with friends over time accumulating wealth or status. Create structures that support ongoing friendship, whether that is regular meals together, shared living arrangements, or just consistent communication. Treat friendship as essential to the good life, not as something to fit in after more important things are handled. Epicurus also warned about bad friends. People who create drama, who take more than they give, who undermine your tranquility rather than supporting it. These are not friends in the meaningful sense. They are acquaintances or users or manipulators. The solution is distance. Just as you remove unnecessary desires, you remove toxic relationships. This is not cruelty. It is recognizing that life is short and your energy is limited. Spend both on people who make your life better, not worse. The greatest treasure is not gold or land or power. It is having people in your life who genuinely care whether you are okay, who will help when help is needed, who make ordinary days pleasant through their presence. Epicurus built his entire life and his entire school around this recognition. He died surrounded by friends, in pain but not in despair, secure in the knowledge that he mattered to people and they mattered to him. That security, that sense of being held by a community of mutual care, was the foundation of his happiness and the center of his philosophy. Epicurus ate barley bread and water most days. This was not poverty, he chose it. He had students who could afford better food and who offered to provide it. He had enough money to buy more elaborate meals. He deliberately selected the cheapest adequate food because it served his philosophy. Understanding why requires understanding what he meant by self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency, or autarkeia in Greek, means needing little from outside yourself. The less you need, the more secure you are. If you need expensive things, you are vulnerable to economic changes. If you need other people's approval, you are vulnerable to their judgment. If you need luxury to be happy, you are vulnerable whenever luxury is unavailable. But if you can be happy with what is easy to get, you are secure. Nothing can easily be taken from you because you do not need much to begin with. This is different from modern notions of independence, which often mean being wealthy enough to buy whatever you want. That is not self-sufficient. That is dependent on maintaining wealth. True self-sufficiency means your happiness does not depend on wealth at all. You need so little that almost any level of resources will suffice. This makes you free in a way wealth never can. Consider housing. A person who needs a large house in an expensive area is trapped. They must earn enough to afford that house. They must keep their job even if they hate it. They must live where the house is, even if they would rather be elsewhere. The house, which seems like a symbol of success, is actually a chain limiting their options. Now consider someone who can be content in a small room. They can live almost anywhere. They can work almost any job because their housing expenses are minimal. They can take risks, change careers, move to new places without worrying about maintaining a mortgage. Which person is more free, the one with the mansion or the one with the room? The same applies to food. A person who needs gourmet meals is trapped by that need. They must live near good restaurants or have the skills and ingredients to cook elaborately. They cannot easily travel to places without sophisticated food culture. A meal that would satisfy a normal person leaves them disappointed. They have trained themselves to need something specific and difficult to obtain. Someone who enjoys simple food is free. They can eat anywhere. The plainest meal satisfies them if they are hungry. They never face the problem of nothing meeting their standards. This is not lack of appreciation for good food. It is keeping the threshold for satisfaction low so that satisfaction is easy to achieve. Epicurus applied this logic to every area of life. Clothing, simple garments are fine. They keep you warm and covered. Expensive clothing adds nothing essential. Entertainment, conversation with friends costs nothing. Walks cost nothing. Thinking costs nothing. You do not need to pay for amusement. Exercise, walking and simple movements are free. You do not need equipment or gym memberships. Education, thinking and discussing with others provides all the mental development you need. The pattern is always the same. Identify the natural need. Find the cheapest way to satisfy it. Be content with that. This progressively reduces your vulnerability to external circumstances. You become resilient because so little can disturb your ability to meet your needs. This is not the same as asceticism. Ascetics deny themselves pleasure as a spiritual discipline. They see deprivation itself as valuable. Epicurus saw no value in deprivation. He was looking for the most pleasure with the least vulnerability. Simple pleasures provide that combination. They are genuine pleasures, not the absence of pleasure. Bread tastes good when you are hungry. Water is delicious when you are thirsty. These are real positive experiences, not mere absence of pain. But simple pleasures have an advantage over complex ones. They are reliable and sustainable. You can enjoy bread every day without it losing its appeal. The sensory adaptation that makes luxury boring does not apply as strongly to basic satisfactions. Hunger makes food taste good regardless of what the food is. This means simple food can provide daily pleasure indefinitely. Contrast this with luxury food. The first time you have it, the experience is intense. The 10th time, less so. The 100th time, it has become routine. You now need something even more luxurious to get the same response. Your threshold for satisfaction has risen. You have made yourself harder to please, which means you will be pleased less often. This is the opposite of what you were trying to achieve. Epicurus saw this trap and avoided it by never stepping into it. Keep your pleasures simple and they remain pleasures. Escalate them and they become necessities that lose their power to satisfy. This requires discipline, but it is discipline in service of greater pleasure overall, not discipline as an end in itself. The economic implications are significant. A person following Epicurean principles needs very little money. Their expenses are minimal. They can meet their needs through almost any form of modest labor. This means they do not need to sell their time to employers who exploit them. They do not need to pursue careers they hate because of the salary. They can choose work based on whether it is tolerable and allows time for what matters, not based on compensation. This creates a different relationship to the economy. Most people are trapped in it. They must participate, must compete, must constantly earn because their lifestyle demands it. The Epicurean has opted out to a large extent. They participate minimally, earning just enough to cover basic needs, spending their time on philosophy and friendship instead of career advancement. This is threatening to economic and political systems that depend on people pursuing wealth. If everyone lived simply, consumer economies would collapse, growth would stop. The entire structure of modern capitalism requires people to keep wanting more, buying more, working more to afford what they buy. Someone who steps off that treadmill is not just making a personal choice, they are withdrawing their participation from the system. Epicurus understood this. The garden was a deliberate creation of alternative community outside the economic and political mainstream. It was not attempting to overthrow the system. It was just ignoring the system, showing through example that you could live well without participating in the competition for wealth and status that defined Athenian public life. Critics then and now see this as escapism or irresponsibility. Society needs people to participate. If everyone withdrew to gardens and lived simply, who would produce goods, govern, defend the city, create culture? The Epicurean response is that most of what society produces is unnecessary. Most governance serves to protect property and privilege, not to help people flourish. Most of what passes for culture is status competition. The world would lose little if some people opted out. There is also a question of whether everyone could live this way. If some people withdraw to simple living, they can only do so because others continue growing food, maintaining infrastructure, providing the basic goods even a simple life requires. The Epicurean garden depended on a larger economy that produced bread and grew vegetables. It was parasitic in a sense, benefiting from a system its members rejected. Epicurus might respond that the garden was not claiming to be a complete society. It was a philosophical school demonstrating a way of life. Members could and did work to support themselves. They grew food in the garden, they contributed to their shared expenses. They were not purely parasitic, but yes, they depended on a larger society. The point was not to create a parallel civilization, but to show individuals how to live well within the civilization that existed. The practical takeaway is about reducing dependency. Every unnecessary need you have is a point of vulnerability. Every desire you can eliminate is a liberation. This does not mean living in poverty or denying yourself all comfort. It means being very careful about what you allow to become necessary for your happiness. Keep the list short. Keep the items on it cheap and reliable. Build your life so that it remains good even when circumstances change. This produces what Epicurus called autarkeia, self-sufficiency. You are not truly independent of everything. Humans are social and depend on each other. But you are independent of most things most people think they need. You do not need to impress anyone. You do not need to compete for position. You do not need wealth or power or fame. You need food, water, shelter, friendship, and freedom from pain and fear. Most of that is cheap. All of it is achievable. Once you have it, you have everything required for happiness, and nothing can easily take it from you. Philosophy creates a problem for itself. If you are going to tell people how to live, you need to be right about how the world works. But how do you know you are right? This is the question of epistemology, the study of knowledge. Most philosophical schools in ancient Greece had elaborate answers involving reason, logic, and abstract principles. Epicurus took a different approach. Trust your senses. That is it. That is the foundation of knowledge. This sounds naive. Everyone knows the senses can deceive. Sticks look bent in water, but are actually straight. The sun looks small, but is actually enormous. Distant objects appear closer together than they are. How can you trust senses that regularly provide false information? Epicurus had an answer, but it required rethinking what the senses actually do. The senses do not interpret, they do not judge, they do not make claims about reality, they simply register impacts. Your eye receives patterns of light, your ear receives vibrations in air, your tongue receives chemical contacts. These registrations are always accurate as registrations. The eye accurately reports the light pattern it receives. The ear accurately reports the vibration pattern it receives. At this level, the senses cannot be wrong. Error enters when the mind interprets these sensations. You see a stick partially submerged in water. Your eye reports a bent pattern of light. That report is accurate. The light reaching your eye from the stick is bent because water refracts light. Your mind interprets this as meaning the stick itself is bent. That interpretation is wrong. The error is not in the sensation but in the judgment based on the sensation. This means that to gain knowledge, you need to pay attention to what your senses actually tell you and be very careful about the interpretations you add. The senses provide data, reason processes that data. Knowledge comes from correct processing, not from abandoning sensory data in favor of pure reason. This puts Epicurus at odds with philosophers like Plato, who believed reason could access truths beyond what senses provide. Why did Epicurus insist on sensation as the foundation? Because he needed a reliable starting point that everyone could access. If knowledge requires special training in logic or mathematics or dialectic, then only a few people can achieve it. But everyone has senses. Everyone can observe the world. If you build knowledge on that foundation, philosophy becomes accessible to anyone willing to pay attention. This also connected to his ethics. Remember that the good is pleasure and the bad is pain. How do you know this? Because you feel it directly. When you are in pain, you do not need a philosophical argument to know that pain is bad. The sensation itself carries that information. When you experience pleasure, you do not need proof that pleasure is good. You know it immediately through feeling it. The senses provide direct access to the fundamental values that ethics builds on. Epicurus identified different types of sensations. There are immediate perceptions through the five senses. These are the most reliable because they are direct registrations of current impacts on sense organs. Then there are mental images and concepts formed from repeated sensations. These are less certain because they involve memory and processing. Finally, there are feelings of pleasure and pain which provide evaluative information about whether something is good or bad for you. All knowledge starts from these sources. You cannot get knowledge from pure reason alone because reason operates on concepts, and concepts come from sensations. If you have never tasted salt, you cannot reason your way to knowing what salt tastes like. You must experience it. This makes experience primary and reasoning secondary. Reasoning helps you organize and interpret experiences, but it cannot replace them. What about mathematics and logic? These seem like pure reason, independent of sensation. Epicurus would say they are abstractions from sensory experience. You see 2 apples and 2 more apples and notice you have 4 apples. You repeat this with different objects and form the abstract concept that 2 plus 2 equals 4. The concept is abstracted from concrete sensory experiences. It is not independent of sensation, even though it transcends any particular sensation. This empiricism had practical applications. When people came to Epicurus with fears about gods or death or fate, he asked them to examine their actual experience. Have you ever experienced a god intervening in the world? No. Have you ever experienced being dead? No, because if you were dead, you would not be experiencing. Have you ever experienced being controlled by fate? Or have you experienced making choices? You experience making choices, therefore trust the experience over the abstract fear. The method was consistent. Bring claims back to observable reality. If someone says the gods punish wrongdoing, ask whether there is actual evidence of this. Do good people always prosper and bad people always suffer? Obviously not. So the claim is not supported by observation. If someone says you need wealth to be happy, observe whether wealthy people seem happier than those with enough. Often they do not. So the claim fails the empirical test. This does not mean Epicurus rejected all reasoning or all claims beyond immediate experience. He believed in atoms even though you cannot see them, but he believed in them because they explained observable phenomena. Things fall, collide, combine, separate. These observations require explanation. Atoms and void provide a simple explanation that accounts for what we observe. The atomic theory is an inference from sensation, not a replacement for it. The test for any theoretical claim is whether it fits with observations and whether it helps explain what you observe. If a claim contradicts clear observations, reject it. If it explains nothing, it is useless, even if not strictly false. This is scientific thinking before science had formalized itself. Epicurus was applying empirical standards 2,000 years before the scientific revolution. Where does this leave areas like ethics and politics where observation is complicated? Epicurus applied the same method. Observe what actually makes people happy or unhappy. Do not trust traditional wisdom or abstract principles. Look at actual lives. People who live simply with good friends seem happier than people chasing wealth and fame. People who avoid political conflict seem more tranquil than those constantly competing for power. These are observations you can verify yourself. This made Epicurean philosophy testable. You do not have to take the teacher's word for it. Try living simply. Try removing unnecessary desires. Try focusing on friendship. Observe whether your life improves. If it does, the philosophy is confirmed by your experience. If not, reject it. This is philosophy as experiment, not as revelation or logical proof. The emphasis on sensation also explained why Epicurus was suspicious of complex reasoning. The more steps between observation and conclusion, the more room for error. Long chains of logic can arrive at conclusions far removed from anything you can actually verify. Plato's theory of eternal forms, for example, cannot be tested against observation. It is pure speculation. Epicurus saw no value in such theories. They do not help you live better, and they introduce unnecessary confusion. Some critics accused him of oversimplifying. Reality is more complex than what senses reveal. Sophisticated reasoning is needed to understand the world deeply. But Epicurus would ask what deep understanding means if it has no connection to observable reality and no practical application. If your complex theory cannot be verified and does not help anyone live better, why bother with it? It is mental gymnastics, not philosophy. This anti-intellectualism, if that is what it was, served a purpose. Philosophy should be useful. It should help people overcome fear and achieve tranquility. Complex theories that require years of study to understand do not help most people. Simple principles grounded in common observation do help. Epicurus was choosing accessibility and utility over intellectual impressiveness. The method also protected against dogmatism. If knowledge comes from observation, and observations can be checked, then claims can be corrected when they conflict with new evidence. You are not required to accept doctrines on authority. You can verify them yourself. This makes Epicurean philosophy more flexible than systems based on revelation or pure reason. It can adjust when experience shows that previous conclusions were wrong. Modern science operates on similar principles. Observation grounds theory. Theories must make testable predictions. When predictions fail, theories are revised. This Epicurean foundation for knowledge anticipated key elements of scientific method. Not completely, of course. Epicurus made errors that better observation would have corrected. But the fundamental orientation was right. Trust experience. Test claims against reality. Reject what cannot be verified. For practical purposes, this means being skeptical of claims that cannot be checked. Someone tells you that you will be punished after death. Have they observed this? No. Can you observe it? Not until you are dead, at which point observation is impossible. So the claim cannot be grounded in sensation. Reject it, or at least do not let it disturb you. Someone tells you that wealth will make you happy. Have you observed this to be true? Does observation of wealthy people confirm it? If not, reject the claim. The result is a clear-eyed empiricism that strips away cultural nonsense and focuses on what you can actually know from experience. This was liberating for people trapped in systems of belief based on authority and tradition. You do not have to believe what priests tell you. You do not have to accept what philosophers claim. You can observe for yourself and draw your own conclusions. This democratization of knowledge was as radical as any political revolution. Pain is unavoidable. Bodies break down, illness happens, injury happens, aging brings chronic discomfort. No philosophy can eliminate pain from human life. But philosophy can change how you relate to pain, and that change can make a significant difference to overall happiness. Epicurus developed a framework for thinking about pain that reduced its psychological impact even when the physical sensation remained. First, distinguish types of pain. Acute pain is intense but brief. You break a bone, it hurts terribly for days or weeks, then it heals. You have surgery, the recovery is agonizing, then it passes. This type of pain is bearable because you know it will end. The intensity is not the main problem. The temporariness makes it manageable. You can endure almost anything if you know it will not last forever. Chronic pain is mild but persistent. A bad back aches constantly. Arthritis makes joints stiff and uncomfortable. Digestive problems create ongoing discomfort. This type of pain never reaches the intensity of acute pain, but it does not go away. It is always there in the background. The persistence is the problem, not the intensity. Yet because it is mild, you can function with it. It does not overwhelm you. You can still think, still enjoy things, still have conversations. The important insight is that you never face the combination of intense and endless pain. If pain is intense enough to be truly unbearable, it is also short-lived. Your body either heals or you die. If pain persists indefinitely, it is mild enough to live with. Nature, or the atomic structure of bodies, does not produce the nightmare scenario of agony that goes on forever. This observation makes all pain more bearable. You can categorize any pain you experience into one of these types and know that you can handle it. When acute pain comes, remind yourself that it will pass. This is not wishful thinking, but factual observation. Bodies heal, time passes. The pain that seems overwhelming today will be gone or much reduced next week or next month. Keeping this perspective helps you avoid the psychological spiral where pain makes you panic, panic makes you tense, tension makes pain worse. You can stay relatively calm because you know the end is coming. When chronic pain is present, remind yourself that it could be worse. This is not about gratitude or finding meaning in suffering. It is just factual. The pain is there, but it is not preventing you from functioning. You can still do most things you want to do. You can still experience pleasure in other areas. The pain is a constant background negative, but it does not dominate your entire experience. Other things can still be good. Epicurus tested this framework during his final illness. His letters from that period describe severe pain from kidney stones and intestinal problems. He did not pretend the pain was not real or severe. He acknowledged it directly, but he also noted that the pleasure of recalling conversations with friends outweighed the physical suffering. The mental capacity for pleasure remained intact despite the body's pain. By focusing on mental pleasures, he maintained overall positive experience even while in significant physical distress. This suggests a strategy for handling unavoidable pain. Cultivate sources of pleasure that do not depend on the body being comfortable. Mental pleasures work well for this. Remembering good times with friends brings genuine pleasure. Thinking through interesting problems brings pleasure. Planning future simple pleasures brings pleasure. Even imagining beautiful scenes or reviewing knowledge you have acquired can be pleasant. These mental activities cost nothing and remain available even when physical pleasure is blocked by pain. The mind can also distract from pain to some extent. When you are absorbed in conversation or thinking, you notice pain less. It is still there, but your attention is elsewhere. This is not the same as eliminating the pain, but it reduces the suffering. Suffering is not identical to pain. Suffering includes the mental reaction to pain, the fear and frustration and sense of being overwhelmed. You can have pain without as much suffering if you manage your mental response. Part of managing the mental response is accepting that pain happens. Fighting against reality creates additional suffering. The pain is here. Wishing it were not here does not help. Getting angry about it does not help. Asking why this happened to you does not help. These mental reactions add psychological suffering to physical pain. Better to accept the factual situation. You are in pain. That is unfortunate. Now what can you do about it? Sometimes the answer is to seek treatment. Pain often signals something wrong that can be fixed. A broken bone needs to be set. An infection needs medicine. Ignoring treatable pain is foolish. But sometimes pain cannot be fixed, at least not immediately. Then the answer is to minimize it where possible and mentally adjust to what remains. Take available pain relief, rest. Avoid activities that worsen it, and focus your mind on things that provide pleasure despite the pain. Epicurus distinguished between necessary and unnecessary pains. Necessary pains are those that come from nature or unavoidable circumstances. Illness, injury, aging, these produce necessary pains. You did not choose them and cannot fully prevent them. Unnecessary pains are those you create through your own choices. Overindulgence creates stomach pain. Excessive exercise creates muscle damage. Pursuing dangerous activities creates injury. These pains are avoidable by making different choices. The strategy is to avoid unnecessary pains entirely and handle necessary pains with the techniques described. Do not create problems for yourself. Do not eat so much that you feel sick. Do not drink so much that you have hangovers. Do not expose yourself to needless risks. This eliminates a large category of pain right away. Then for the pains that remain, use mental strategies to minimize suffering. There is also a question of choosing lesser pains to avoid greater ones. Sometimes you must endure pain to prevent worse pain later. Medical treatment often works this way. Surgery is painful but prevents the greater pain of untreated disease. Exercise can be uncomfortable but prevents the pain of physical deterioration. These are rational trade-offs. You accept lesser pain now to avoid greater pain later. Epicurus endorsed such trade-offs when the calculation was clear. He was not against all pain. He was against unnecessary pain and against letting pain disturb you more than it must. If enduring some pain improves your overall state, endure it. Just be sure the calculation is actually in your favor. Many people endure significant pain pursuing goals that will not actually make them happier. They sacrifice their body's comfort for wealth or status, then discover the wealth and status do not compensate for the damage done. That is bad calculation. The physical body's capacity to experience pleasure does not disappear entirely even during illness. You can still taste food, though appetite may be reduced. You can still feel the warmth of sun or comfort of a soft surface, though less intensely. Small physical pleasures remain available. These should not be neglected. They provide moments of positive sensation that balance against pain. A person in chronic pain who ignores all available physical pleasure makes their situation worse than necessary. Pain also varies in intensity throughout the day. It may be worse in the morning or evening. It may spike during certain activities and ease during others. Paying attention to these patterns allows you to plan. Do important or pleasant activities during periods when pain is less. Rest during periods when it is worse. This does not eliminate pain, but arranges your life around it in a way that maximizes functioning and pleasure. There is a temptation when in pain to withdraw completely, to stop doing anything because everything hurts. This usually makes things worse. Inactivity allows the mind to focus entirely on pain, which intensifies suffering. Maintaining some level of activity and engagement, adapted to what your body can handle, keeps the mind occupied and provides sources of pleasure that balance the pain. You are not ignoring the pain or pretending it is not there. You are refusing to let it dominate your entire existence. Epicurus's approach to pain was neither stoic acceptance nor desperate avoidance. He acknowledged pain as bad while denying it the power to destroy happiness. Pain is a negative sensation, genuinely unpleasant, something to minimize when possible. But it is not the worst thing. The worst thing is to have a life with no pleasures, or to be consumed by fear and anxiety, or to have created so many dependencies that you are never secure. Pain is just one factor in the overall calculation of pleasure versus pain that determines quality of life. The practical advice is to approach pain rationally, identify what type it is, estimate how long it will last, take available steps to reduce it, accept what cannot be changed, focus on available pleasures, both mental and physical. Do not add unnecessary suffering through mental resistance to reality. Do not let pain become an excuse to abandon all effort at living well. Handle it as you would any other practical problem, with clear thinking and appropriate action. This will not make pain pleasant, but it will prevent pain from making your entire life unpleasant. Epicurus advised his followers to live unnoticed. The phrase in Greek was leithbiosis, usually translated as live hidden or live unknown. This was not advice to become hermits or drop out of society completely. It was advice to avoid public life, political involvement, and the competition for status and recognition that dominated Greek cities. Stay out of the public eye, do not seek fame, do not pursue office, live quietly among friends. This was controversial advice then and remains controversial now. Why avoid politics? Politics involves conflict. You compete for office against rivals who want to defeat you. You make enemies through your decisions because any decision benefits some people and harms others. You become a target for criticism and attack. You must compromise your principles to build coalitions. You spend enormous energy on activities that distract from friendship and philosophy. All of this disturbs tranquility. Politics also creates vulnerability. Your position depends on maintaining public support. You must care what others think of you. You must cultivate image and manage reputation. A rumor can destroy you. A shift in public opinion can end your career. You are never secure because your status depends on the changeable judgments of crowds. This is the opposite of Epicurean self-sufficiency. Even if you win political success, what do you gain? Power to make decisions affecting others. This seems valuable, but Epicurus questioned whether it produces happiness for the person holding power. Powerful people are constantly worried about challenges to their authority. They cannot trust anyone because everyone wants something from them. They must always be performing, always be strategic. Where is the tranquility in that? Where is the simple pleasure? Power is an unnatural and unnecessary desire, and pursuing it creates permanent disturbance. What about civic duty? Greek cities taught that participation in public life was the obligation of citizens. The city protected you, educated you, provided laws and infrastructure. You owed it your participation in governance and military service. Refusing to participate was shirking your responsibility. Epicurus rejected this claim. You did not ask to be born in this city. You did not choose the obligations others try to impose. You owe the city only what is mutually beneficial, and political participation is often not beneficial to the individual. This was seen as subversive. If everyone thought this way, who would govern? Who would defend the city? Who would maintain public works? Epicurus was not particularly concerned with these questions. He was giving advice for how individuals should live, not designing a complete society. Some people would continue pursuing political power because they had the relevant desires. Fine, let them compete for office. Others could opt out and live quietly. Both patterns could coexist. The garden community was the practical implementation of this philosophy. It existed within Athenian society but remained separate from Athenian political life. Members did not hold office, did not involve themselves in public debates, did not compete for honor and recognition. They created a parallel social space where different values operated. Inside the garden, friendship and philosophy mattered. Outside, power and status mattered. The garden was a refuge from outside values. This required some privilege. You could only withdraw from politics if you had enough resources to survive without political connections. Poor people might need government positions or political patronage to feed themselves. Slaves had no choice about participation or withdrawal. The Epicurean option was available primarily to those with at least modest independent means. Epicurus acknowledged this implicitly by focusing his teaching on people who had some choice about how to live. Yet the resources required were minimal by his standards. You did not need wealth, just enough to cover basic needs. The garden was not expensive to maintain. Simple food and shared housing kept costs low. A person with very modest resources could join and participate. This was more accessible than other philosophical schools that catered to the wealthy, but it was not accessible to everyone. The truly destitute and the enslaved were largely excluded by circumstances. What about broader social justice? If the city oppresses people, should you not fight to change it? Epicurus seemed indifferent to these questions. His philosophy was about individual flourishing, not social reform. If the society is unjust, withdraw from it rather than trying to fix it. Create your own community operating on better principles. This was practical for small groups but did not scale. It offered no solution to large-scale injustice, only a strategy for individuals to escape it. Critics then and now see this as selfish and irresponsible. You benefit from society's infrastructure and protection while refusing to contribute to its maintenance and improvement. You enjoy the security provided by others' political and military efforts while opting out yourself. This is free riding. Worse, it abandons those who cannot withdraw. The poor, the enslaved, the vulnerable who need political change to improve their lives get no help from Epicurean withdrawal. Epicurus might respond that attempting political reform usually fails and always disturbs the reformer. The energy spent on politics could be spent on friendship and philosophy instead. You can help individuals directly through friendship without getting involved in politics. You can create small communities like the garden where better ways of living are demonstrated. This is more effective than trying to change entire societies through political action. There is also a question of whether political engagement actually helps or just makes things worse. Politicians claim to serve the public good, but usually serve themselves. Political movements claim to fight for justice, but often create new injustices. Revolution replaces one set of oppressors with another. Maybe withdrawal is not irresponsible. Maybe it is refusing to participate in a corrupt system that harms more than it helps. The advice to live quietly applied beyond politics to all forms of status seeking. Do not try to become famous. Do not compete for recognition. Do not build a reputation. These activities create the same problems as politics. You become dependent on others' opinions. You create enemies through competition. You spend energy on activities that do not actually produce happiness. Better to live unknown, appreciated by friends but ignored by the wider world. This is difficult for people who have been taught that significance comes from impact, from being known, from making a mark on the world. Epicurus said that significance was a trap. You do not need to make a mark on the world. You need to live well. These are different goals. Making a mark requires disturbing many people, creating conflict, taking risks. Living well requires peace, friendship, and simple pleasures. Choose the second goal and abandon the first. Modern culture makes this harder. Social media creates constant pressure to be noticed, to build a following, to share your life publicly. Privacy is increasingly difficult to maintain, but the Epicurean principle still applies. The more you expose yourself to public judgment, the more you create vulnerability and disturbance. The quieter you keep your life, the more control you maintain over it. This does not require complete isolation, just discretion about what you share and with whom. The question of military service deserves attention. Greek cities expected citizens to fight when needed. Refusing could mean exile or death. Epicurus navigated this by not explicitly rejecting military service while making clear that warfare was not compatible with the philosophical life. You might be forced to fight by circumstances, but you should not volunteer for it, and you should avoid situations where fighting becomes likely. War is perhaps the ultimate disturbance to tranquility. It involves violence, death, fear, hardship, and separation from friends. Nothing about it contributes to a pleasant life. The glory and honor warriors seek are unnatural desires that do not satisfy. The person who fights for honor gains nothing of real value. The person who avoids war when possible protects their well-being. If draft or circumstance forces participation, you endure it as you would any other unavoidable pain, but you do not embrace it. The practical advice is to minimize entanglement with political and social systems that create obligations and vulnerabilities. Do not take jobs that require political involvement. Do not seek positions that make you visible. Do not enter into competitions for status and recognition. Keep your life small and private. Build your identity around your friendships and personal philosophy, not around public roles. Be a good friend, a thoughtful person, someone who lives well. Let that be enough. This creates tension with impulses toward altruism and service. Many people want to help others, to contribute to their communities, to fight injustice. Epicurus was not saying you should not care about others. He valued friendship, which requires caring deeply about specific people. But he distinguished between helping friends directly and trying to help humanity through political action. The first is effective and personally fulfilling. The second is usually ineffective and personally draining. If you want to reduce suffering, the most reliable method is to live well yourself and help your friends live well. Model a better way of being. Create spaces like the garden where that way of being can flourish. This does more good than political activism that usually fails and always disturbs those involved. It is a different theory of change, one based on example and direct relationship rather than power and policy. The advice to live quietly and avoid politics was Epicurus's way of protecting tranquility in a world full of disturbance. You cannot control what cities and empires do. You cannot prevent war, injustice, or political corruption, but you can control your own involvement in these systems. You can choose to step back, to live simply among friends, to focus on what is actually within your power. That choice might not change the world, but it will change your life, and your life is what you actually have to work with. Epicurus had a dim view of romantic love. This surprises people familiar with his reputation as a hedonist. Surely the philosopher of pleasure would celebrate romantic and sexual passion. But Epicurus evaluated romantic love by his usual standard. Does it produce more pleasure than pain? His conclusion was that it usually does not. The intensity people find attractive is also what makes romantic love disturbing to tranquility. Start with sexual desire. This is a natural desire, but not a necessary one in Epicurus's classification. You will not die from celibacy. Sexual satisfaction is pleasant when it occurs, but its absence does not create the acute pain of hunger or thirst. This means sexual desire should be satisfied only when doing so is easy and does not create complications. Often it creates complications. What complications? Pregnancy, for one. In a world without reliable contraception, sexual activity risked creating children you might not want or be prepared to support. Disease was another risk. Sexually transmitted infections existed in the ancient world just as now. Social complications were perhaps most significant. Sexual relationships created jealousy, possessiveness, gossip, damaged reputations, and social conflict. These potential harms often outweighed the brief pleasure of the sexual act. Epicurus reportedly advised his followers to avoid sex entirely if possible. This was not a moral judgment. He was not saying sex was sinful or dirty. He was saying it was usually more trouble than it was worth. The cost-benefit analysis did not favor sexual activity for most people in most circumstances. Better to ignore the desire or satisfy it minimally and move on to more stable pleasures. What about sex within committed relationships? This reduces some risks but introduces others. A partnership creates dependency. You become vulnerable to your partner's choices and feelings. If the relationship ends, you experience significant pain. While the relationship continues, you must manage conflicts, negotiate differences, and maintain the bond. All of this requires effort and creates disturbance. Romantic love adds another layer of complication. The emotional intensity people associate with being in love is fundamentally disturbing. You think constantly about the other person. You feel anxiety about whether they return your feelings. You experience jealousy when they pay attention to others. You feel devastated when the relationship has problems. This is the opposite of tranquility. It is voluntarily subjecting yourself to emotional turbulence. The culture of Epicurus' time, like modern culture, celebrated romantic love as one of life's highest goods. Poets wrote about it, stories featured it, people shaped their lives around it. Epicurus looked at this and saw mass delusion. What people called the greatest pleasure was actually a source of tremendous suffering. They were confusing intensity with quality. Romantic love was intense, yes, but intensity is not the same as pleasure in the Epicurean sense. Remember that Epicurean pleasure is defined as absence of pain and disturbance. Romantic love is full of disturbance. Even when going well, it creates emotional volatility. When going badly, it creates agony. The person in the grip of romantic passion is not tranquil. They are agitated, vulnerable, not fully in control of their emotions. This state might feel exciting or meaningful, but it is not pleasant by Epicurean standards. Epicurus preferred friendship to romantic love. Friendship provides companionship, affection, and mutual support without the intensity that makes romantic relationships disturbing. Friends care about each other but do not typically become obsessed. Friends support each other without creating dependency in the way romantic partners do. Friendship is stable where romantic love is volatile. For someone seeking a tranquil life, friendship is clearly superior. What about physical affection and intimacy? These can exist in friendship. The Greeks were more comfortable with physical affection between friends than modern Western culture tends to be. You could share your life with close friends, express affection, and find companionship without the specific intensity of romantic love. This provided much of what people seek in romantic relationships while avoiding the complications. Some interpret Epicurus's attitude as repressed or fearful. He must have been hurt by love and developed his philosophy as protection. Or perhaps he was constitutionally incapable of romantic feeling and rationalized his limitation as wisdom. These psychological explanations miss the point. His evaluation of romantic love was consistent with his evaluation of everything else. Does it contribute to a stable, pleasant life? His observation was that it usually does not. You can disagree with his conclusion, but the reasoning is coherent. Consider what happens to people in romantic relationships. They often neglect friendships, sacrificing stable relationships for the romantic one. They make poor decisions under the influence of passion. They tolerate mistreatment they would never accept from friends. They experience jealousy, possessiveness, and fear of loss. When relationships end, they go through periods of intense suffering. Even in successful long-term relationships, they must navigate conflict and compromise continuously. Where is the net gain in pleasure? Epicurus would acknowledge that some people find romantic relationships worth the complications. If you have found a partner who enhances your life without creating significant disturbance, and if the relationship brings genuine, sustained pleasure rather than just intensity, then perhaps it makes sense for you. But this is rare. Most romantic relationships, honestly observed, create more disturbance than they are worth. Better to focus on friendship, which provides companionship without the downsides. The advice on sex was similarly pragmatic. If sexual desire becomes bothersome, satisfy it in the simplest way that does not create complications. This might mean masturbation. It might mean very casual encounters with clear boundaries. It should not mean elaborate courtship, romantic entanglement, or situations that create obligation and dependency. Treat sexual desire like an itch. Scratch it efficiently and move on. Do not build your life around it. Marriage created specific complications in the ancient world. It was primarily an economic and social arrangement, not about romantic love. Marriage created property ties, inheritance rights, and social obligations. It typically involved significant expense and required ongoing household management. For a philosopher seeking simple living, marriage added complexity without corresponding benefit. Epicurus apparently never married and advised others against it. Children were another consideration. Raising children requires enormous resources, time, and emotional investment. Children create vulnerability because their well-being matters to you but is not entirely in your control. The ancient world was dangerous for children. Many died young. This created the risk of devastating grief. Even children who survived required decades of care. For someone seeking tranquility, taking on this burden made no sense unless you had strong specific desires for children. Epicurus's garden included women as equal participants, which was unusual. But the relationships within the garden appear to have been friendships rather than romantic partnerships. Men and women studied together, lived together in some cases, and formed close bonds. But the structure was a community of friends, not a collection of romantic couples. This demonstrated that men and women could interact meaningfully without romantic and sexual relationships dominating. Opponents used this against him. They claimed the mixed-sex community must be sexually promiscuous. What else would men and women do together? This revealed more about the critics' assumptions than about the garden's reality. The critics could not imagine non-sexual relationships between men and women. Epicurus was demonstrating that such relationships were possible and in fact superior to romantic entanglement. The modern reader might find this all rather cold. What about love? What about connection? What about intimacy? Epicurus valued all of these but found them most reliably in friendship. The specific form of connection called romantic love was, in his assessment, not the best way to achieve intimacy and bonding. It was too unstable, too intense, too disturbing. Better connections existed that did not carry the same costs. You do not have to accept his conclusion. Many people find romantic relationships central to their happiness despite the complications. But his analysis deserves consideration. How much of what you call love is actually obsession or dependency? How much of the intensity you value is actually disturbance you have learned to mistake for depth? How would your life differ if you invested the energy you spend on romantic pursuit into building strong friendships instead? These are worth asking even if you conclude that romance is worth the costs for you. The practical advice is to be very careful about romantic and sexual entanglements. Recognize the potential for disturbance. Do not let passion override clear thinking. If you do form romantic relationships, try to keep them simple and stable rather than intense and dramatic. Prioritize friendships that provide companionship without the complications. Do not organize your life around finding or maintaining romantic love. If it happens and genuinely contributes to your well-being, fine, but do not make it the center of your existence or the primary source of meaning in your life. Time creates problems for happiness. Pain in the past cannot be changed. Pain in the future may never arrive but still creates present anxiety. Only the present moment actually exists, yet people spend most of their mental energy in past or future, missing the only time when they can actually experience anything. Epicurus developed a framework for relating to time that maximized happiness across past, present, and future. Start with memory. The past is gone. Events that occurred cannot be changed or re-experienced. Yet memory brings past experiences into present awareness. A pleasant memory creates present pleasure. You recall a conversation with a friend, a beautiful sunset, a satisfying meal, and you feel pleasure now from remembering. The past event provided pleasure once. The memory of it provides pleasure again. This makes pleasant memories valuable independent of the original experience. This means you should create experiences that will become pleasant memories, not necessarily intense or expensive experiences. Simple moments with friends, quiet afternoons in pleasant surroundings, small achievements, these create memories that provide ongoing pleasure for years. The person who lives simply, focuses on friendship, and pays attention to daily experience is constantly creating future pleasant memories. These memories become a resource you can draw on later. Epicurus himself relied on this during his final illness. He wrote that recalling philosophical conversations with friends brought pleasure that outweighed his physical pain. The memories were decades old in some cases, but they remained vivid and pleasant. He had invested in friendships and experiences that paid dividends throughout his life and even during his death. This was planning, not for external circumstances, but for internal resources. Unpleasant memories create present pain just as pleasant memories create present pleasure. Recalling humiliation, loss, mistakes, or trauma brings those experiences back into awareness. You suffer again from events that are long over. This seems like a waste of present happiness on unchangeable past. Epicurus advised avoiding rumination on painful memories when possible. The past is done. Dwelling on it does not help. This is easier said than done. Painful memories intrude involuntarily. Trauma creates memories that cannot be simply dismissed. Epicurus acknowledged this but suggested that focusing on pleasant memories could help. When painful memories arise, deliberately shift attention to pleasant ones. Over time, this retrains the mind to spend more time with memories that create pleasure rather than pain. You cannot erase painful memories, but you can reduce the time you spend with them. Regret is a specific type of painful memory. You recall a decision you made and wish you had chosen differently. This creates present pain about an unchangeable past event. Epicurus saw regret as particularly useless. The decision is made, the consequences have unfolded. Wishing you had chosen differently changes nothing except making your present experience worse. Better to accept that you made the best decision you could with the information and state of mind you had at the time. Move forward rather than torturing yourself with alternative scenarios. Future anticipation works differently. The future has not happened yet. You cannot know with certainty what will occur. Yet people spend enormous energy worrying about possible futures that may never arrive. This creates present pain for events that do not exist and might not exist. The anxiety is real even though its object is hypothetical. Epicurus distinguished between useful and useless anticipation. Useful anticipation involves planning for likely events you can actually influence. You will probably be hungry tomorrow, so having food available makes sense. You might become ill, so maintaining your health is reasonable. This is practical foresight that prevents future pain. It creates slight present effort to avoid larger future problems. Useless anticipation involves worrying about events you cannot control or that are unlikely to happen. What if war comes to your city? What if you lose everything? What if a disaster strikes? These possibilities exist but are not likely for most people most of the time. Even if they occur, worrying about them in advance does not help. The worry creates present suffering without preventing future suffering. The distinction comes down to control and likelihood. Can you do anything about this potential problem? Is it reasonably likely to occur? If the answer to both is yes, then some planning makes sense. If the answer to either is no, then worry is wasted energy. You are creating present pain for no benefit. Consider the fear of death. Death is certain, but its timing is unknown. You cannot prevent it ultimately. Worrying about when you will die creates present anxiety without changing anything about your mortality. This is useless anticipation. Better to accept that death will come and focus on living well in the time you have. This is not ignoring death, but refusing to let fear of it disturb your present experience. Some anticipation of future pleasures is actively helpful. Looking forward to a meal when you are hungry increases present pleasure. Planning to see friends tomorrow brings pleasure today through anticipation. The expectation of simple future goods enhances the present. This is useful anticipation because it actually improves your current state. But anticipation of complex or unlikely future pleasures often disappoints. If you spend months looking forward to an expensive vacation, reality rarely matches expectation. The anticipation might provide some pleasure, but it also creates desire that makes present life feel inadequate by comparison. You are waiting for the future instead of appreciating the present. When the anticipated event arrives, it must carry the weight of all that expectation, and it usually cannot. Epicurus recommended staying mostly in the present. The past is gone. The future is uncertain. The present is the only time you actually inhabit. Paying attention to present experience means noticing the pleasures available right now, the warmth of sun on your skin, the taste of water when thirsty, the sound of a friend's voice. These small present pleasures are easily missed when your mind is in past or future. This does not mean ignoring past and future completely. Pleasant memories enhance the present. Reasonable planning prevents future problems, but the balance should heavily favor present awareness. When you notice your mind has wandered to past regrets or future anxieties, bring it back to what is actually happening now. This is a practice that requires repetition, but becomes easier over time. The person skilled at managing time attention experiences more pleasure from the same circumstances than someone who is mentally absent. They are fully present for simple pleasures. They draw on pleasant memories when useful. They plan for the future without obsessing over it. They do not waste present moments on unchangeable past or hypothetical future. This is not a special state requiring meditation or training. It is just paying attention to where your mind is and redirecting it when it wanders to places that create pain without benefit. Gratitude connects to memory in useful ways. Being grateful for past goods brings those goods back into present awareness as pleasant memories. You recall help a friend gave you and feel gratitude. The gratitude is present pleasure arising from past event. This is different from obligation or debt. You are not required to repay anything. You are simply noticing and appreciating something good that happened, and that appreciation feels pleasant. Similarly, savoring present experiences helps create future pleasant memories. When something good is happening, pay attention to it. Notice details. Be fully present. This makes the memory richer and more vivid when you recall it later. You are investing present attention in future pleasure. The experience itself is better because you are paying attention, and the memory of it is better because your attention made it more vivid. This suggests a different approach to planning than most people use. Instead of planning for future circumstances, plan for future mental states. Do not ask, how can I get more money next year? Ask, what can I do now that will create pleasant memories and future contentment? The answers are different. Money might create pleasant memories if used well, but often it does not. Time with friends almost always creates pleasant memories. Simple pleasures reliably create pleasant memories. Pursuing status rarely creates pleasant memories and often creates painful ones. The future self who will inhabit those memories is you. That person will have whatever memories you are creating now. If you spend your time pursuing things that do not actually produce pleasant memories, your future self will be poor in resources for happiness. If you invest in friendship, simple pleasures, and experiences worth remembering, your future self will be rich even without much money. Death interrupts the future. At some point, there will be no more future for you. Does this make planning for future memories pointless? Epicurus would say no. You do not know when death will come. You might live many more years. Those years will be happier if you have pleasant memories to draw on. Even if death comes soon, the time remaining is better spent creating and enjoying pleasant memories than worrying about death. The unity of time appears when you realize that past, present, and future all exist in the present moment. The past exists as present memory. The future exists as present anticipation. The only time you ever actually experience is now. Managing how you relate to time is really about managing what occupies your present awareness. Do you fill it with painful memories and anxious anticipations, or with pleasant memories and present experiences? This is a choice you can make repeatedly throughout each day. Your mind wanders to something painful. Notice it. Bring it back to something present and pleasant, or to a pleasant memory, or to simple anticipation of the next meal or conversation. Over time, this reshapes your experience of life. You spend more time in pleasant mental states and less time in painful ones. The circumstances might not change, but your experience of those circumstances improves significantly. For nearly 2,000 years, Epicurus was portrayed as the enemy of everything good. Christianity declared war on his philosophy, and won so completely that his actual writings almost disappeared. Only fragments survived, and for centuries those fragments were known primarily through the hostile summaries of Christian writers. Understanding why Epicurus was considered so dangerous reveals what was actually revolutionary about his philosophy. The immediate practical threat was to religious authority. Epicurus said that gods exist but do not intervene in the world. They do not answer prayers, do not punish wrongdoing, do not reward virtue. Religious rituals are useless for gaining divine favor. This undermined the entire structure of ancient religion. If the gods do not care what you do, why sacrifice to them? Why maintain temples? Why support priests? The priests obviously saw this as a threat to their position and livelihood, but the threat went deeper. Ancient cities were organized around religious observance. Collective rituals bound communities together. Believing the gods cared about the city's welfare gave meaning to civic life. Epicurus was saying none of this mattered. The gods were not watching. Your city meant nothing to cosmic forces. This was political subversion disguised as theology. Christianity faced an even more fundamental threat from Epicureanism. Christian doctrine centered on resurrection, judgment, eternal reward, and punishment. Epicurus said death is the end of experience. There is no afterlife, there is no judgment. This contradicted Christianity's core claims. Worse, Epicurean ethics made Christian ethics look unnecessary. You do not need the threat of hell or promise of heaven to live well. You just need clear thinking about pleasure and pain. The Christian response was to deliberately misrepresent Epicureanism. They equated pleasure with vice, making Epicurus the philosopher of gluttony and sexual excess despite all evidence to the contrary. They claimed Epicureans denied morality when Epicurus had a clear ethical system based on consequences. They said Epicureanism led to social collapse when the garden had functioned as a stable community for generations. These misrepresentations became the standard view and remained dominant through the Middle Ages. The attack was effective because it was simple. Epicurus says pleasure is good, pleasure is bad, therefore Epicurus is bad. Most people never looked deeper than this syllogism. They did not ask what Epicurus meant by pleasure or whether the equation of pleasure with vice was accurate. The caricature was easy to remember and confirmed existing prejudices against philosophical materialism. It stuck. There was also a political dimension to the Christian opposition. The Roman Empire adopted Christianity as its official religion. The empire needed citizens who feared divine punishment and sought divine reward. This made them controllable. They would obey laws, pay taxes, and fight wars because they believed cosmic consequences depended on their behavior. Epicureanism offered liberation from these fears and therefore from this control. A population of Epicureans would be ungovernable in important ways. They would not fight wars for glory because glory is an unnatural desire. They would not sacrifice themselves for the state because there is no afterlife to reward such sacrifice. They would not respect religious and political authority that rested on claims about divine will. They would pursue simple living and friendship rather than economic productivity and imperial expansion. This was intolerable to an empire. Medieval Christianity suppressed Epicureanism almost completely. Monks copied manuscripts they considered valuable. Epicurean texts were not copied. Without copying, ancient manuscripts crumbled to dust. By the year 1000, virtually all Epicurean writings had vanished. A few fragments survived in quotations by other philosophers. Diogenes Laertius preserved 3 of Epicurus's letters in a biographical work, but the vast library of 300 scrolls was gone. The recovery began in the Renaissance. A papal secretary named Poggio Bracciolini found a manuscript of Lucretius's poem On the Nature of Things in a German monastery in 1417. This was a complete exposition of Epicurean physics and ethics in Latin verse. Its rediscovery introduced Epicurean ideas to European thinkers who had known them only through hostile summaries. The impact was immediate and profound. Lucretius described a world of atoms and void without divine providence, where humans were free to pursue happiness without fear of gods or afterlife. This resonated with humanist scholars who were questioning church authority and seeking alternatives to Christian worldviews. The Epicurean vision of natural law, empirical investigation, and human autonomy became ammunition for Enlightenment thinkers challenging religious and political orthodoxy. Thomas Jefferson owned multiple copies of Lucretius. He called himself an Epicurean. The ideas of natural rights, pursuit of happiness, and government by consent rather than divine right all have Epicurean elements. The American founders were not full Epicureans, but they drew on Epicurean concepts when constructing their political philosophy. The declaration that all people have a right to pursue happiness is deeply Epicurean. Scientific materialism owes a debt to Epicureanism. The atomic theory, though primitive in its ancient form, pointed toward the correct understanding that matter is made of particles. The empiricism that grounds knowledge in observation, rather than revelation or pure reason, became central to scientific method. The rejection of supernatural explanation for natural phenomena cleared space for genuine investigation of causes. Epicurus's physics was wrong in specifics but right in orientation. Why was this so dangerous? Because it threatened every power structure built on controlling what people believe about reality. If you believe the world is controlled by gods who judge your actions, you must consult those who claim to know divine will. If you believe in an afterlife where eternal fate is determined, you must follow the path authorities claim leads to salvation. If you believe cosmic purpose requires your sacrifice, you will accept suffering for abstract goods. Epicurus cut through all of this. The world operates by natural law accessible to observation. There is no judgment after death. Cosmic purpose does not exist. You are free to pursue a pleasant life defined by your actual experience, not by what authorities claim you should value. This is liberation, and liberation is always dangerous to those who benefit from control. The mischaracterization of Epicurus as advocating mindless hedonism served to discredit this liberation. If pleasure-seeking means debauchery, then Epicurean freedom looks like license and social chaos. The actual Epicurean message, that happiness comes from simple living, friendship, and freedom from unnecessary fear, is much harder to attack. So it was buried under caricature and remained buried until relatively recently. Even now, many people associate Epicurus with gourmet dining and expensive tastes. The word Epicurean in modern English means someone who enjoys fine food and luxury. This is precisely backwards from what Epicurus taught, but the misunderstanding persists. It serves the same function it did for Christian critics. It makes Epicurean philosophy seem like justification for self-indulgence rather than a serious alternative to conventional values. The danger of Epicurus was always this. He offered a comprehensive worldview that made conventional religion and politics look unnecessary. He showed that you could understand the world, live ethically, and achieve happiness without gods, kings, or any authority beyond observation and reason. This is threatening to anyone whose power depends on people believing they need guidance from above. The threat remains relevant wherever authority rests on claims about the supernatural or the cosmic importance of political systems. 2,000 years separate us from the garden in Athens. The world has changed in ways Epicurus could not have imagined. Modern technology, global economies, democratic politics, scientific understanding of nature, all of this is new. Yet the core insights of Epicurean philosophy remain applicable. The question is how to translate ancient principles into contemporary practice without distorting them to fit what we wish they said. Start with desire classification. Epicurus divided desires into natural and necessary, natural but unnecessary, and unnatural and unnecessary. This framework still works. You need food, water, shelter, safety. These are natural and necessary. You do not need the expensive versions of these things. A simple apartment provides shelter as effectively as a mansion. Plain food satisfies hunger as well as gourmet meals. The cheap version meets the need. Natural but unnecessary desires include things like variety in food, comfortable furniture, pleasant surroundings. Modern life makes these easier to satisfy than in ancient Athens. Mass production has made comfort cheap. A basic chair costs little. A fan or heater costs little. You can satisfy natural but unnecessary desires more easily now than Epicurus could. This is genuine progress. Take advantage of it, but do not let these desires escalate. The escalation happens when you let marketing convince you that you need premium versions of everything. The chair is not enough. You need a designer chair. The fan is not enough. You need central air conditioning. The pleasant surroundings are not enough. You need upscale neighborhood and luxury finishes. Each step away from basic satisfaction makes happiness more expensive and less secure. Resist this escalation by remembering that the basic version already satisfies the natural desire. Unnatural desires are everywhere in modern culture. Social media creates constant comparison with others, feeding the desire for status and recognition. Advertising creates desire for products you never knew existed. The economy requires constant growth, which requires people to keep wanting more. You are swimming in messages designed to create unnatural desires. Resisting requires conscious effort and clear understanding of what you actually need. The Epicurean test still works. Can this desire be completely satisfied? Hunger can be. You eat until you are no longer hungry. The desire for more money cannot be. There is always more money to want. The desire for fame cannot be. There is always greater fame to pursue. When a desire has no natural endpoint, it is unnatural. Pursuing it will create permanent dissatisfaction. Better to recognize this and refuse to engage. Friendship remains as important as ever. Modern mobility makes stable friendship harder. People move for jobs, relationships, education. Communities are less stable than in ancient Athens, where most people lived their entire lives in one city. But the need for friendship has not changed. You still need people you trust, who care about your well-being, who provide security and companionship. The challenge is creating structures that support friendship in a mobile society. This might mean deliberate effort to maintain contact with distant friends. It might mean creating communities of practice or shared interest that provide regular interaction. It might mean choosing to stay in one place rather than constantly moving for career advancement. Epicurus would say that friendship is more important than career success, so if you must choose between them, choose friendship. Digital communication helps maintain friendships across distance but is not a complete substitute for physical presence. Texting a friend is better than no contact. Video calls are better than text. But actually being together, sharing meals, having conversations while walking, this provides something digital communication cannot fully replicate. Build your life so that you have regular physical presence with at least a few close friends. The simple life is both easier and harder now than in ancient Athens. Easier because basic goods are cheaper. Food is abundant for most people in developed countries. Water comes from taps. Shelter is widely available. You can live simply on very little money. Harder because cultural pressure pushes toward consumption. You are expected to have many things Epicurus never heard of. Opting out of consumption culture marks you as strange or poor. The practical approach is to ignore those expectations. Live in smaller spaces than you can afford. Buy used goods rather than new. Cook simple meals rather than eating out. Wear basic clothing rather than fashion. Save the difference and work less. This creates time for friendship and philosophy, which are more valuable than the things you did not buy. People will judge you. Let them. Their judgment does not affect your actual well-being. Technology creates new questions Epicurus never faced. Is smartphone use compatible with tranquility? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. A phone lets you maintain contact with friends, access information, handle practical matters efficiently. These uses serve Epicurean goals. But phones also create addiction, constant distraction, social comparison, and fear of missing out. These disturb tranquility. The solution is not to reject technology, but to use it deliberately for purposes that serve your well-being and avoid uses that disturb it. The same applies to all modern conveniences. Cars provide mobility but create expense and require work to afford them. Television provides entertainment but consumes time that could go to friendship or thinking. The internet provides information but creates information overload and rabbit holes of distraction. Each technology has costs and benefits. Evaluate them honestly rather than assuming technology automatically improves life. Work is unavoidable for most people. You need money to cover basic needs. Epicurus had the garden providing food and shared housing minimizing expenses. You probably do not have this. You must participate in the economy at least enough to earn minimal income. The question is how much to work beyond that minimum. Epicurean logic says to work as little as you can while still meeting natural and necessary desires plus some natural but unnecessary ones. This means refusing career ladder climbing unless you specifically enjoy the work for its own sake. Promotions usually mean more responsibility, more stress, more time commitment. If the trade-off is worth it to you, fine. But do not pursue promotion automatically because you are supposed to. Most people would be happier working less and earning less rather than working more to afford things that do not actually increase their well-being. The fear of death can be addressed with Epicurean reasoning even now. You still do not experience being dead. Death is still the end of you, not a state you will inhabit. Therefore, it is still nothing to fear. Modern medical technology does create a new complication. Dying can now be prolonged through intervention. This raises questions about when to refuse treatment, how to balance life extension against quality of life, when to accept death rather than fighting it indefinitely. Epicurus would likely say that life extension is only valuable if it provides time for friendship and pleasure. If medical intervention keeps you alive but in pain, isolated, unable to experience the goods that make life worth living, then the intervention fails the test. Better to die than to exist in permanent discomfort, cut off from friends. This is not about giving up too easily, but about honest assessment of whether continued life will actually contain more pleasure than pain. Politics remains a trap. Modern democracies encourage participation in ways Epicurus's Athens did not. You are told that voting is your duty, that you should stay informed about current events, that you should engage with political issues. Epicurean advice is to minimize this engagement. Vote if you want, but do not agonize over it. Stay informed about issues that directly affect you, but do not consume news constantly. Avoid political arguments and activism that disturb your tranquility without producing real change. This advice feels irresponsible to people raised to believe political engagement is essential to good citizenship. But Epicurus would ask whether your political engagement actually helps anyone or just creates stress for you. For most people, the answer is that it creates stress without significant impact. You do not control political outcomes. You can control how much mental energy you invest in political worry. Reducing that investment improves your life without harming anyone else. The question of children deserves consideration. Modern contraception makes avoiding children easier than in ancient Athens. You can choose whether to have children with more control than previous generations had. Epicurean analysis suggests that children are a mixed proposition. They bring joy, but also enormous worry, expense, and loss of freedom. Whether the trade-off is worth it depends on how strong your desire for children is. If you do have children, Epicurean principles suggest raising them simply, teaching them to distinguish between necessary and unnecessary desires, and prioritizing their happiness over their achievement. Do not pressure them to pursue status and wealth. Help them develop friendships and find work they can tolerate. Model simple living and contentment. This is different from intensive parenting culture that treats children as projects requiring constant optimization. The environmental crisis creates new applications for Epicurean simplicity. Simple living with minimal consumption is exactly what environmental sustainability requires. Pursuing fewer unnatural desires reduces resource use. Living in smaller spaces reduces energy consumption. This is not sacrifice. It is recognizing that most consumption does not increase happiness anyway. Environmental benefit is a side effect of living according to Epicurean principles, not the primary motivation. Community remains difficult to create, but is still worth the effort. You probably cannot create a garden like Epicurus had, but you can find or create smaller communities of shared purpose, regular dinners with friends, book clubs or discussion groups, shared housing with compatible people, cooperative arrangements where members support each other. These modern versions of the garden provide some of what Epicurus offered, even if imperfectly. The greatest challenge is resisting cultural pressure. Modern society is organized around values opposite to Epicureanism: consumption rather than simplicity, competition rather than cooperation, status seeking rather than quiet contentment, busyness rather than leisure, intensity rather than tranquility. Living according to Epicurean principles means swimming against a strong current. You will be judged as lazy, unambitious, weird, or dropping out. The question is whether you care about those judgments. Epicurus would say you should not. The people judging you are pursuing unnatural desires that will never satisfy them. They are trading their limited time and energy for things that do not actually produce happiness. You are making different choices based on clearer thinking about what actually matters. Their disapproval is just noise. Ignore it and focus on living well by your own standards. The final word belongs to Epicurus himself, from a fragment that survived 2,000 years. Do not spoil what you have by desiring what you have not. Remember that what you now have was once among the things you only hoped for. This is the essence of his philosophy. Pay attention to what is actually present in your life. Simple pleasures, friendship, freedom from pain and fear, these are available now. Pursue them. Stop chasing things that will not satisfy. Live well in the time you have. It is simpler than it seems, and the rewards are immediate.